Good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us at this conference this afternoon. My name's Liz. I'm the Chief Executive of the Association for Citizenship Teaching. We're delighted to be offering this event this afternoon in partnership with the Education and Engagement team at UK Parliament. We've put a really lovely programme together for you today. Each session should stand alone, so if you do need to drop in and drop out, you can do, and you'll be able to catch all the sessions later on as we'll share them via our Padlet that we've set up for the conference, and we'll make sure you know where they are. I'm going to hand straight to Rosie, who's going to introduce our first speaker this afternoon. So Rosie, thank you very much.
Thanks, Liz. So hi, everyone. I'm Rosie and I'm a member of the Education and Engagement team here at UK Parliament. So thank you again for joining us. So I'm really excited to introduce our first guest speaker, Baroness Martha Lane-Fox. Baroness Lane-Fox has an extensive background in the digital and technology industries as the co-founder of recognisable companies such as Lucky Voice and Lastminute.com, and as the Chancellor of the Open University. She became a member of the House of Lords in 2013 and now sits on the National Security Strategy Joint Committee and is the chair of the COVID-19 committee. So thank you very much for joining us today, Baroness Lane-Fox. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. It's slightly daunting talking to a bunch of teachers who are clearly brilliant at explaining things and standing in front of a class and captivating people. So I feel somewhat intimidated because teachers are such heroes and do such amazing work. But I hope that you'll find some of my reflections on the Lords and some of the work that I've done in government interesting. And I'll leave plenty of time for us to have a discussion. As Rosie kindly said, I've had a strange kind of career. It's now nearly, I can't believe it, nearly 24 years since we started Lastminute.com, working on the business plan back in the late 90s. And it was a completely different time then. It was a time when it felt as though the internet was going to blow apart things in, frankly, a kind of only positive way, and might have been the naivety of a 25-year-old young woman who was excited by all these possibilities. But genuinely remember that sort of heightened feeling of what technology was going to enable. And one of the things that I felt very strongly about, which was incredibly kind of important in the shifting sands of time at that moment, was how it was going to help more people use their voices in more ways. And one of those ways was how it was going to change the democratic processes, governments, parliaments, and so on. I'm going to return to that. I just wanted to pin that at the beginning of what I talk about, because I really remember back in the late 90s when we were convincing people the internet wasn't going to blow up, when we were convincing people that they should invest in our business Lastminute.com, which, by the way, no one really wanted to do, that this was a far bigger shift than just people buying things on the internet, that these forces were going to completely reorganize how power was structured. And I think basically people thought me and my business partner were completely bonkers for talking about those things. I then had a funny kind of trajectory, did a load of things, and I was then asked in 2009 by the then Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, if I would become the UK's National Digital Inclusion Champion. Now, because you're a smart bunch of teachers, you'll immediately notice that the hilarity of the acronym gave my friends much mirth as they announced I was officially the Chief DIC. But when we got over that, it was actually a fantastically interesting job that I was given, and a role and an opportunity. And Gordon Brown was very kind to suggest that I could help think about how to make sure even the most vulnerable communities in the UK got access to the internet. I didn't really know anything about how the internet rollout, if you like, was going at that point. You know, I'd started a business, and then for various reasons had some time out from my work at a very serious car crash. I'd spent 2 years in hospital. So then when I came back to thinking about this issue, I kind of imagined in the late 2000s, as opposed to the late 90s, that, you know, everyone was sort of using the internet in my sort of ridiculous filter bubble. And of course, that was not the case, and it continues to be so today. And it really set me on a journey of trying to help and think about how to build the most digital and robust and resilient country. And I believe this really, really matters, because not only are we all the beneficiaries when everybody is online, because the economic growth that will happen in the country, the effective way that we can help give access to information, we can empower people to be able to do all the things that probably we all take for granted. But also it would enable government itself to go through a bit of a revolution in how it used technology, and Parliament as well. So I set on a journey in 2009. I started by trying to really put numbers around how many people were excluded from the internet. Many, many millions, depending on how you cut those numbers. At that point, about 15 million adults had never used the internet. Sort of sliding scale, because obviously some people had never ever been online and didn't know what we were talking about. Some people maybe had once done something. Some people were a bit more sophisticated, but couldn't really, to use the language of this afternoon, be effective citizens, couldn't, use a government website, know how to search for what benefits they might be allowed, look for work, and so on. So this, to me, gets to the crux of a lot of the complex issues that technology, government, civil society need to unpick over the next decade, and then obviously Parliament around that as well. So we got some funding into programs of work to help people in vulnerable communities get the skills and access to the internet. We worked with a collection of corporate partners to try and build out the internet and broadband infrastructure in places where it wasn't reaching. And I also became involved in the actual mechanisms of central government, how they operate, how the government thinks about its delivery to us, its citizens. Now, you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, shut her up. This sounds like the most dry and tedious thing ever. It actually became kind of an obsession for me, because I felt that the loop of government delivering amazing services using the internet would bring government closer to us citizens. Because far too often government was sort of sitting over here, policymakers, parliament, legislators, writing legislation or moving the pieces around in people's lives without actually thinking about the impact in how that's being delivered in people's communities. Coming from a tech background, you always sit down with your users. In our business, me and Brent, my co-founder, we were the users of our website. Why did we want to start lastminute.com? Because we were completely disorganized. We wanted to be able to do more fun things at the weekend. Government was far away from its citizens and its users. And I'll never forget when I thought, okay, I really want to try thinking and helping government use technology to deliver better services for citizens. Started to write some reports, got some traction internally in government, talked to the Prime Minister. By then it was David Cameron, who thought I could do some useful work trying to think about how government uses technology. And I brought together some people who do policy work. This happened to be actually in working in the area of power of attorney and looking at what happens when people die, with people that actually build technology and services, with people who actually use those services. And the people who have got out of the civil service who were working on these policies had never sat down with a user, a citizen, ever in their career in the civil service. Not because they were bad people, they were brilliant, they were dedicated, they were inspirational, but because the mechanisms of government didn't really think about how now in the technological age, in the digital age, you were close to your users, in my language of tech, but citizens more importantly, for us as citizens of the UK. So we created this kind of revolution in government. We set up something called the Government Digital Service. We created gov.uk, which I hope many of you have used. I'm sure many of you have used over the last very stressful year, where we've all been frenziedly looking up information about whether we're allowed to meet with one person, two person, go out, not go out, and so on. Spare a moment of thought for all the people frenziedly working to keep that website up. I know how hard it is when ministers are constantly changing the goalposts. I mention all of this as background, and not because I want you to think, oh, wow, she's done all these amazing things or anything like that, but because I use it as a backdrop to how we really, I believe, are only at the beginning of how the digital world is going to change the relationship between governments, citizens, institutions that we have to function, make our government and democracy function. And I feel we're right at the beginning of that journey. It was so exciting to see, sorry, I've got some friend who's come to say hello. It was so exciting to see how gov.uk could really change how, no, I know you've got strong views on this subject, which is going to be quiet. It was so exciting to see how gov.uk could really change the way that different policy areas thought about how they might deliver services and crucially improve the experience for people, often the very, very most vulnerable people. You know, it might seem kind of strange, think, well, they don't need the internet, but actually imagine you're so stressed in your life already, you're trying to manage complex needs and challenges, and the last thing that you need is government then demanding so much of you in, you know, turning up to a particular place, a particular location, queuing, all these things that could be improved dramatically with better use of technology, whether it's through the health system, your education system, whether it's through the benefit system, tax system, whatever it might be. So I really believe we have an enormous opportunity still to create a far more effective society if we use technology in more effective ways. And I really don't mean moving everything on the internet, absolutely not. I mean using it to make things better and simpler, and using face-to-face as robustly and in tandem. So I did this work, I mean, I've come out of the technological world, done this work in government, worked for a couple of prime ministers, tried to help the UK keep moving forward in how it thinks about digitization. And I thought, how can I then turn that work into a kind of more meaningful daily work? Now, I didn't want to continue working for at the kind of prime ministerial national level. So I applied to become a crossbench peer in the House of Lords. Thought it was never going to work. You know, I'd heard about these people's peers that Tony Blair had created. They put in 2 people a year to the House of Lords through a slightly different process. I'm sure you guys are aware. You get, you fill in an application form, you have 2 rather scary interviews with a selection of peers from around the House. And if you're lucky, you get selected. I thought it was a bit remote because I was still pretty young. It wasn't clear that it was what they were looking for, people like me. Turns out they were, I think partly because they thought I might be able to help with the Wi-Fi in the House of Lords, not my special skill, but I did get in, and I've been a member ever since. And, you know, it's a great joy to me to be a crossbench peer because you have that individual freedom, you don't get whipped, you really have to be neutral and look at each issue on the merits rather than from a political point of view. You have a loose grouping, but you're not a group. So it's a really phenomenally privileged position to be in. And you'll find, as you well know, I'm sure many members of the crossbench group have had kind of spectacular careers in whatever they've chosen to do, whether it's the army, running the civil service, leading health systems, and so on and so on. So I feel very lucky. You know, it's also, frankly, again, as I know I'm among friends, a strange place. You know, it's a kind of quite intimidating place. And when I first arrived, although I've been lucky to do lots of things in the entrepreneurial landscape and done that work in government, can be overwhelming in that building. You feel kind of, I'm used to the tech world where everything's being opened up, where, you know, the walls are transparent. You don't sit down in big in offices. You have big open plan spaces and you're all sharing a kale juice at lunchtime. Suddenly I was in this environment where, you know, you're in this building that feels a bit more like an old-fashioned school. It feels, you know, full of traditions and all the things that make Parliament tick. And it took a bit of time to find my feet. I contributed to some debates and so forth. I kind of felt a bit frustrated that the things I was interested in, the backdrop I've just tried to paint for you, didn't feel as though it was really at the fore of government. It didn't feel as though Parliament was really wanting to use technology to try and think about how to improve the delivery of democracy effectively. And then I applied to be a member of the Joint Committee on National Security Strategy. This is a committee that oversees the National Security Advisor. As you'll be aware, select committees are a really incredible sort of extra tool in the toolkit of MPs and peers to keep the scrutiny on government. Every aspect of government has a select committee that looks at it. You'll be well aware that the Commons has got some really powerful select committees. You know, Margaret Hodge did an amazing job in the Public Accounts Committee, holding government to account about its spending. You see a colleague of mine now, Nikki Morgan, who did a great job on the Treasury Select Committee. You've got Tom Tugendhat running the Foreign Affairs Committee. These are important places where ministers, often the Prime Minister, has to come to deliver evidence about decisions that they've made. So alongside legislation, questions, debates, it's another very important way to keep government focused, to keep ministers on their toes, and to learn and to share ideas. And particularly in the House of Lords, where obviously you've got a slightly different time horizon, and you've got a different set of political motivations. House of Lords reports and select committees tend to be trying to think about the long term a bit more, trying to think about how to contribute to the policy debate in a helpful way, not trying to catch out ministers so much, but certainly trying to hold them to account. So it was really fascinating to be on a joint committee because you've got peers who have got much experience on my committee of defence issues, ex-foreign ministers. We've got David Trimble, who obviously engineered the Northern Ireland peace process, Lord King, who used to be the Defence Secretary. We've got Tom Tugendhat from the Commons, as it's a joint committee. We have the Chief of the Defence. You know, it's all kinds of incredible experience around the table. I tried to bring some of my experience of cybersecurity, and we look at a bunch of issues around the national security agenda. We've done stuff on the critical national infrastructure. We're currently doing something on biosecurity, the machinery of national security. So I had a bit of a background in select committees. I was interested. It felt like a meaningful way to contribute to the work of Parliament. Again, I was frankly still somewhat surprised at the way that the processes are run. They're quite arcane. Again, if you come from a world where I do, where, you know, if I sit on boards, we share board papers, I'm sure like you in your working life, everything is Googleified. You know, you have a wide contribution with transparent documents that everybody's sharing. And that's very different to Parliament, where even though select committees are open and they're filmed, the process by which they produce work still feels quite opaque. So fast forward to the pandemic, to pretty much a year ago, clearly, where we were shut down and Parliament had to dramatically shift the way it operates. I mean, I really cannot overestimate to you what an enormous surprise it was to me personally, and what an achievement for the team to have got the House of Lords and the House of Commons up and running within about a month of lockdown to be able to deliver a fully digital Parliament. If you told me that even 3 weeks before that we would be voting on our smartphones, I would honestly have thought you were smoking dope, because it seemed so far removed. The inertia was so high to put in innovative and interesting technology in the hands of parliamentarians. But it happened, and it's been kind of an amazing revelation. I will get to my own select committee. I hope you'll forgive me some of this background, but I hope you'll find it interesting. In the pandemic, what I found interesting particularly was the way that voices shifted and changed, because you're not just standing up in the chamber and shouting and having to get attention, and because it's much more ordered using a digital environment. I personally found it much easier to use my voice because it's not quite so intimidating. You don't feel the kind of oppression of all the people that know a lot about the political system and so on. And I thought, oh, I'm going to apply to be a member of this new select committee that's been formed by the House, apparently partly with the backing of Number 10, to look at the long-term implications of COVID. And this is a committee that we're trying to focus on the kind of 2 to 5 year horizon, not an analysis of now, not an inquiry into what's happened. There'll be other places for that, but really trying to look into the future, pick out the themes that are the ones that we think the government should really be trying to think about now, not just, well, they're trying to manage the current crisis. I applied. The process to get onto a select committee is that the House sets it up, and then there's an appointments commission effectively that appoints members to be on it. There's a set number of crossbenchers and different political party peers on from each side. And no one was more surprised than me when I got a call from the head of the crossbench group, called the convener, to say, would you like to be chair? And I said, oh, I really don't know. This sounds way above my pay grade. But I thought, screw it, you know, the worst they can say is no when I get put forward as a no name. So I did. And I was chosen and put into this quite strange situation to start a select committee in a new subject, in a select committee that had never existed before, not an ad hoc one. Those are small, discrete inquiries that last a few months. This was a new select standing committee, so sui generis, it means it lasts forever, or until we stop it, with colleagues, some of whom I knew, some of whom I'd never met before, all digitally. And it's been a kind of interesting experience for me, having kind of championed technology. I was like, whoa, this is quite strange not to have met face to face, not to be able to read the room, not to get the measure of my new colleagues. But because of where I come from, and I hope perhaps you understand this because of what I've described to you about my own background, I felt that it was incredibly important that, as we were a new committee formed during the global pandemic, looking at long-term implications of something that was affecting quite literally everyone's lives on the planet, that we should involve citizens in this committee in a way that perhaps had not happened before. Now, other committees, of course, have gone out and asked people for evidence. Every committee does that. But I really wanted to be more ambitious than that and push our committee out to places that perhaps it hadn't been thought of before, and really to try and land in the conscious where people who maybe had never even heard of a select committee in Parliament. So we did a big push through schools. We did a big push through social media. We did a big push through local community groups, local newspapers, local radio stations, to ask the UK and its citizens what they thought the long-term implications of this pandemic would be. So rather than us sitting in that slightly overwhelming building, or actually now just all at our desktop, to go out and ask people. And this is where the machinery of Parliament and select committees is so amazing, because when you push it a bit to do things in a different way, it does respond. And I was absolutely thrilled that we had over 1,000 pieces of evidence from individuals. We then worked with research institutions to get another 3,000 pieces of evidence from their collective power to go out to more networks. And we built up a huge bank of people's thoughts about what they believed this pandemic was going to do to us over the long term. And it was so inspiring. People sent us poems, people sent us pictures, students wrote to us. It was really fantastic. We also did a selection of drop-in groups to hear from different communities of people, you know, single mothers, people who have children with very extreme learning disabilities, the Roma community, people who have been furloughed in various different industries, businesses and so on. So my colleagues on the select committee could go into maybe 9 or 10 sessions over our first period of work to listen to what people were saying about the long-term implications. Now, if I'm again being candid, I'd have said it worked pretty well, but it's hard doing new things in a select committee. And I think that some of my colleagues felt a bit frustrated that we hadn't produced a kind of traditional select committee report where you'll write down 5 or 6 recommendations for government and you'll hassle them to get them implemented, and you may or may not be successful. What we produced is actually a living, breathing database online that anyone can use of all the evidence that we have. Other select committees can use it if they're looking at some of these issues. And we've produced some kind of top line work about what the country's main anxieties are. They're all available online. You know, no massive surprises. People are incredibly worried about rampant inequalities. People feel like they've seen things they didn't realize were in our country, and sort of having seen them cannot unsee them. People are very worried about care, just full stop, both for people around them, but also their children, their older parents. People are worried about access to green spaces and their built environment. People are worried about their family dynamics, coping, balance, all of those kinds of things. And people are worried about their relationship with technology and the digital world. Again, all of this perhaps unsurprising, but what gave me sort of satisfaction with our process was that we really had heard from so many different types of people. And I felt as though it was an attempt to open up the select committee process and Parliament to a wider universe of people. Having done that last September, we then starting to pick off some of those themes to do deeper work on. So now we're doing one about a more formal inquiry where we've taken evidence over a period of months each week from different people, from experts, but also from individuals as well, talking about technology and its long-term impact on us, physical health, mental health, work, and education and the health system. So that's kind of what we've been up to now. I'm going to stop talking in a minute and go to questions, but I hope that gives you a bit of a sense both of my own background and the kind of ways that you come to different things in the Lords. I would just end by saying, you know, the House of Lords is a place where much needs to change, in my opinion. There are things about it that do not work well, but it does also have the capacity to tolerate a somewhat oddball like me, an entrepreneur who's come from a strange background, who does want to try and do things a bit differently. And, you know, you move the dial a tiny bit, maybe it goes backwards a bit, maybe it goes forwards a bit, but, you know, select committees are an interesting way to try and push out work into new places that Parliament has done, to hear from voices in different ways, and crucially to keep holding the government to account. So thank you for listening to all that rambling, and I really look forward to the discussion.
Lovely, thank you very much. I think we can all agree that was really interesting to listen to. So yeah, we'd love to take the opportunity now to open up the floor to any questions that anyone has for Baroness Lane Fox. So please start posting those in the chat box for us, and we can pick up on those. But I'm happy to ask a question of my own, if that's okay, to get us started. It was really interesting to hear some of the work you've been doing to kind of diversify the way that people can contribute to committees using mixed media, hearing about poems and pictures. What kind of effect do you think that's had on the work that you was then able to do as a committee? Oh, I think you might be on mute. Sorry.
God, we all need t-shirts saying that, don't we? You're on mute. I thought I'd cracked that by now. I think 3 things probably for me. Firstly, I felt as chair of a select committee, a brand new select committee focusing on something that's so hard to unpick. You know, who knows what the long-term implications of this hideous time are going to be. I think even when we started the committee, which was in July last year, we thought probably by the end of the year, things will be a bit more back to normal. Actually, it's going to be the end of this year. That in itself has been quite complicated to think about. And what we found when we asked everybody for their views in the country, is that it was incredibly difficult for people to stand out from the often extremely difficult situations they were finding themselves in. So for me, I felt as though, because of all the complexity around this subject and being a new select committee itself and a new chair, that it was very important to position what we do in Parliament in this open way. And even if only a few people notice that, you know, this is something that hopefully citizens will realise is something for them. You know, select committees exist as another way that citizens feel can have confidence that government is being held to account, that things don't just go into the void, that money is not just being spent, that decisions are made with intent, and that people have listened and been heard, and all of the things that you would hope from a high functioning governing party in Parliament. So that's partly what I wanted to do. I wanted to create that atmosphere around this committee. I also wanted, candidly, for my colleagues to feel as though, you know, we can sit in that building and feel frightfully grand. We've all got ridiculous titles and so on, but, you know, our experience is pretty different to the vast majority of experience of people through this last year. And it's, in my opinion, incredibly important to keep really focused on what people are experiencing and to listen to them. So just as a mechanism to keep the focus of our work in the right place. And then the final thing, kind of, which is the biggest chunk, I guess, is we did have this amazing body of evidence. What we've learned from it are all these different themes that you can find in our short report. And, you know, that then has gone on to inform other people's committee work. So it's formed a kind of bedrock of research, but it's also, you know, written to certain ministers to talk about it and so on. So it's kind of there in the background and is informing our work now.
Oh, thank you. And I know that there'll be lots of teachers on the call that will be quite excited about the prospect of especially pupils and students being able to contribute in such a variety of ways. So we've had another question in the chat box from Tom, who says, "Hi there, thank you. This has been really interesting." He says, "I imagine that most of the long-term implications of COVID-19 that your committee has found are rather negative. I was wondering if there are any potentially positive ones, perhaps in digital development."
Yes, I mean, I really think this is such an important kind of fulcrum, Tom. Nice to meet you. I can't see you all, I'm sorry. For me, what I feel I have to balance, especially as chair, and it sort of links, I can see, to the second question that someone's asked around polarization and different views. So I'm going to sort of wrap them together, if you don't mind. The other question is around big policy issues. How do you do as a chair bring views together and not let them get too polarized? Because, you know, I've got a very political select committee. I've got big beasts like Eric Pickles on the Tory side, and Peter Hain, Toby Harris on the Labour side, and Lord Alderdice on the Lib Dems. I've got some really impressive Nicky Morden ex-cabinet ministers. I think I've got the highest percentage of ex-cabinet ministers on my committee of practically any committee. So they're all very collegiate, but they still have big P political views, and that can be polarizing. And I think one of the things that is an access about is this question around the negative versus the positive. Now, that's a sort of slightly ridiculous binary way of looking at things, when obviously there's nuance through all of that. But, you know, you can find real darkness clearly through what's happened, and there will be a profound long-term effect on young people, on the quality of some family life, the quality of business, and the quality of communities. I mean, you'd think I was insane if I didn't recognize that. But I do also believe that there are, if it's not kind of positives, there are ways that we can use this. And I hate the expression that people have been using about build back better, sort of one of those political things that just gets wheeled out. But if not build back better, build back mindful of what we feel like we want to leave behind and what we want to take with us from all of this. And, you know, for some examples, and this is a bit about the technology, I guess, I think lots of people are just totally zoomed out. I mean, enough. It's horrible working like this. Everyone would like to see people face to face, but it also has provided much flexibility for employers and for employees. And we did some research that's shown that, well, 50% of jobs are able to be done from home. About 14% of people want to work from home, a lot more than they had in the past. I think it's probably actually a bit higher than that now. And I think that's what we've seen, is that you don't have to suffer on productivity or all the things that we maybe thought were going to be an issue. You can actually spend a couple of days at home and not have so much difficulty. So if it leads to more flexible working, different ways of working for people, particularly disabled people or people with challenges of other kinds, then that can be very positive. Just as we've heard a lot about how this moment has helped people, or people have felt the need to connect to nature a lot more than ever before. Not everybody is able to, clearly. You know, I'm lucky I have a garden. I hope people here do too. I hope your children in your schools can get out. But it has definitely, I think, led to a bit of a more deepness in people's psyche, certainly in policymakers' psyche, about the importance of the environment, how we build it, how we have green spaces, what cities look like, how are they going to be for the future, how can we make sure that we couple this really appalling time we faced with the appalling nature of what we're facing in the climate crisis, and make sure we make our towns and our cities fit for purpose for the future. So again, I think that could be a very positive thing. One of my committee members is Floella Benjamin, the presenter, and she is very interested in empathy and how we can make that a kind of national characteristic. And she thinks that a lot more empathy and compassion has come out of this time in our country than we've felt before. And she's interested in how we can weave that into the work we're doing. So there are positive themes, but I think we have to recognize that this has not been a positive time for most people. And that, you know, and that is a polarizing thing on my committee, and I'd be lying if I said it wasn't sometimes challenging. And I think the most challenging thing I found actually as chair is, you know, I'm an entrepreneur. I have a point of view, right? That is what you do as an entrepreneur. You have to see a direction of travel, convince the world to follow you over into it and make it happen. As chair of a select committee, that is not your job at all. You are there to listen, to garner to the views of all the people that you're working with, to work out the right way forward that is the most kind of collective view. And that can be hard, especially around the future topics that the committee want to touch on. You know, I've got people who want to do something about the devolution and the governance of the UK. I've got people who want to do something about social care. I've got people who want to do something about, you know, young people. I've got people who want to do something about the future of the high street. Yeah, it's quite disparate, and sometimes that can become political. So you have to just listen, find the common ground. So, okay, you want to do the high street, you want to do jobs. Can we think about how we can bring those two things together? You want to do young people, well, does that fit in there as well? So we can frame things in ways that feel collegiate, but it's hard and it can be tricky sometimes. Sorry, I went on way too long. I'll be quiet now.
No, thank you. And I think it's really interesting to hear those kind of themes that have to be considered and balanced, as you said. Thank you. So we've had another question in our chat box from Adam. Thank you, Adam, who asked, could we hear a bit more about the way select committees approached and got contributions from young people and schools, and what local structures or networks helped this to happen?
Yes, and we did go into schools and we got some stuff from some teachers. I was really keen to set up a kind of parallel youth select committee. It didn't quite work as I'd hoped, but we did have a couple of sessions where we got some young people to come and talk to us about their hopes and so on. There is a system through the parliamentary network, the outreach programme of Parliament, that works through schools, as you're probably aware. So we use that. I don't directly as chair. I have a small team. We've got a clerk, a couple of other people, a policy person, some researcher assistants and so on. They work with the parliamentary teams to use the networks that Parliament has to go out into schools and so on. So it was, I would say, a pretty good response. I personally think that the voice of young people needs to be brought more into Parliament. We have the Youth Parliament, we have Parliament Week and so on, that I still think it's always valuable. It's just always valuable.
Excellent, thank you very much. And we will be hearing from Shapla Begum later on into the conference about that kind of work and engaging members of the public. We have a question from Jane. Thank you, Jane, who says, fascinating, thank you. You mentioned digital voting. Can you see this being rolled out more generally?
Oh, I really wouldn't like to hazard a guess in my crystal ball, Jane. It's already a live hot topic of debate about whether this should stay. You know, I don't think of this as very controversial. I think it gets into all sorts of tangles in the Lords because of how people get paid and so on, and that's often linked to voting, which in my opinion is wrong anyway. The Commons has stopped people being able to vote like this. For me, you know, I'm registered disabled. I walk with 2 sticks. It's phenomenal because it means I don't have to be at Parliament at 10 o'clock at night. I don't have to queue up in a lobby and stand. I can do it like this. And I don't vote on everything where I'm not whipped. I vote if I've thought about it and I've got a contribution that I want to make. But I know it's fraught with hazard. So I do hope we retain some elements of it. I mean, beyond that, for the wider world, you know, it's complicated. I used to be an absolute 100% paid up advocate of electronic voting, and I think I still am, but we've got to make sure the systems are really super robust. And I've yet to be totally convinced that we've got to that place. So jury's out a bit for me, but I do hope that we've managed to take, just in parliamentary terms, some of the best bits of this hybrid world, because it's worked pretty well. And for some people, in some categories, I think it's really meaningful. I mean, you know, the House of Lords is not a place for women with children or men with children who have to be the carer. I've got twins of 4 years old. It's not a place that's easy to be when you want to be at home and put them to bed and so on, because so much parliamentary work happens late at night. So these kinds of revolutions, in my opinion, allow more voices to be heard and to be utilised.
Thank you. We have another question from John, who asks, can I solicit your views on technology in the classroom?
Oh, very
a big question.
Small subject, John, thanks. Well, you know, I think from 2 points here. I mean, I think it's not option. I mean, what am I trying to say? Digitization is happening, right? It's just how much you choose to go along the spectrum. Do I think that everything should be digital? No. I mean, it's incredibly important. Clearly, social interaction, forming relationships, learning how to navigate groups, all those things that children learn that you are way more qualified than me to talk about. But do I think that there could be more imaginative and creative use of technology? Yes, of course I do. But so many things have to happen for that to change. I mean, there has to be way more resourcing. In my opinion, we need a huge rethink about how we resource tech in schools, and it has to not be about the technology. It has to be about what kind of education system do we want, how personal, how creative, how innovative, and then how does technology help that? You don't start with the tech. In my opinion, you start with what you're trying to build. You start with the vision, and I am unclear, or it's not clear, or you are experts in what the vision that this government has for the education system. But I feel like we are living in 2021, not 1821. We could be giving children so much more opportunity using clever bits of technology. And that does not mean making it all online. That does not mean taking away some of the incredibly valuable things that you and schools do. But I don't believe that there has been the kind of imaginative revolution in education that there has been, and there's beginning to be a bit perhaps in health and has been in other bits of the world. So for me, there is a massive amount of upside that we can help our children have a more fulfilling experience of learning, particularly on the kind of edge cases. You know, I've got friends with children who are older than mine, and you know, I see it with children that have got some learning difficulties or just more interested in certain things where they connect with something to do with an app or a game or something, just a different way. And I just feel like, why should we not help children with those solutions as opposed to try and wrestle the tech away from them? In a considered way, in a system change approach, I think it can be dramatically effective to improve the outcomes for children.
Well, thank you again. So we have another question from Gary. Thanks, Gary, who says, do you foresee select committees using online formats in the future to encourage engagement with individuals and organisations across the UK to save people having to travel to Westminster, etc., when giving evidence?
This is a live topic, Gary. You have hit the nail on the head with this one, because there's a real debate right now happening, and it's sort of slightly separate in the Commons to the House of Lords, so I can really only speak to the latest things in the House of Lords about how hybrid we should remain. You know, for all the reasons I've sort of touched on, for some people it's been really phenomenal, this experience. I would argue, again, pushing through that inertia in some of my colleagues about, oh, I don't want to get on to technology. Actually, this has been an amazing way for them to see you can do a lot. Of course, it's not perfect, but you can do a lot. And it does potentially open up way more opportunity for more voices. And this is one of the key things, as you've quite rightly highlighted. There's no question that we've had more people able to talk to our select committee because we've been doing it remotely, because it's easier for their time. It's easier for, it's just easier to fit around everybody's schedule and to, cover geographies and all of the things, as you quite rightly say. So I very much hope that we can embed this kind of hybrid thinking into our long-term future. But having said that, it's also somewhat strange that I've never been in a room with my committee colleagues. I long for the day when we can be, because some of the themes we're trying to wrestle with, you get that energy from each other in a different way. And it can be hard on Zoom. It can be blunt. It can be forced. It can be kind of a bit too polite. It can be all those different things. So I think we have to find the middle ground. But what I would hope is that we've seen that this can work. And if it can work when we're forced into this strange situation, if we reimagine it in a way, I think it can be very powerful. And if it means that more voices can come into Parliament, that is one huge, enormous impetus I think we must never lose sight of.
Brilliant, thank you. I'll just come to Emma's question, who asks, how much power do select committees have to redact or edit policy if it is found to be ineffective or unpopular?
Well, we don't have power. We're not governing, right? We're scrutinizing government. So of course, you try and put the recommendations you're making or hook them maybe onto specific policies or create policies around them. So again, to give you a teaser of where we're coming out with the work we've been doing recently, government talks a lot about digital policy, about, the tech sector is digital as though it's some kind of separate thing, and as though you can sort of have a separate policy for digital. And my beef is that's kind of ridiculous. It weaves into everything, and we've got to have a complete rethink about all of our departments and how technology should impact them. And it's not to do with technology, it's to do with, back to how we just talk about technology in the classroom, what kind of system are we trying to create? So I think this kind of siloed thinking about tech policy can be quite damaging, because I think it kind of only is that much of the picture of what affects people's lives. So we can absolutely talk about policies that we don't think are effective. We can ask ministers to come and talk to us who are in charge of those policies, but we don't write them. We're not governing. We're just another mechanism to ask some questions, ask some challenges, but also present some solutions. My aim is to be helpful. No one wants people just to be shouting from the sidelines. You want to be encouraged and given ideas, because that's much more helpful, and will, I think, get much more done.
Oh, lovely. Thank you again. So I think we've come to the end of the questions that I can see in the chat box there. So unless anyone comes through with any more, I'd just like to say a huge thank you again for joining us. It's been so interesting to listen to what you've had to say about your work in select committees and your background in general. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of everyone when I say that.
Thank you very much. Well, also thank you from me to all of you for all the work you do. And I can't imagine what this last year has been like for all of you. I hope it was nice to see your children back in the classroom. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And to everyone else at the conference, we're now going to come to a short screen break. Thank you very much. And we'll be coming back here at 3 o'clock. Is that right, Liz? Lovely. Okay, so see you all at 3 o'clock. Enjoy your short break. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us if you've just joined the conference, and thanks to those of you that joined us earlier on to see the talk from Baroness Lane Fox. Just a reminder that today's session is being recorded, so you'll be able to catch up on anything you might have missed. So I'm delighted to introduce our next guest speaker, Anne-Marie Griffiths, the Clerk of the Work and Pensions Committee. So Anne-Marie has huge experience of select committees and began working for them in 2008. She was the clerk of the Petitions Committee before taking up her current role. So thank you very much for joining us, Anne-Marie, and over to you.
I am absolutely delighted to be here. Now, have I managed to succeed in sharing my slides? Can folks see those there? Anyone could give me a wave? Yes, lovely. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. Brilliant. There we go. There's some slides. I've even worked out how to move them forwards and backwards. Imagine that. Hello, everybody. I am really thrilled to be here talking to you about select committees, because I'm really passionate about the fact that select committees are one of the best ways for people to get involved with Parliament. Most of the time in Parliament, when we're talking about formal parliamentary work, we're talking about MPs or members of the House of Lords talking to each other. In select committees, most of the time when we're meeting in public, it's MPs talking to people from outside Parliament, experts of various kinds, and I'll come into that later, but it's a great way into Parliament for voices from outside, which I tend to think is what Parliament really is in many ways all about. So what I'm going to try to do, I'm going to try to talk, we've got half an hour together. I'm going to try to talk for as little as possible, probably around 15 minutes, and then 15 minutes for all of the questions that you might have for me, because I always think the questions tend to be the most interesting part of everything. So I'll canter through. I know you've already heard from Baroness Lane Fox this morning, and indeed you've all got wider expertise. So I'm just going to run through the basics very quickly so we're all on the same footing. And it may well be that a member from the House of Lords has a slightly different perspective than an official from the House of Commons and how it all works. And I think that's probably something quite interesting to think through how those might differ. So to start us off with the basics, what are select committees? They are groups of members of one or sometimes both houses of Parliament. They are formally set up by each of those houses. So they have a status within Parliament that perhaps more informal groups don't. And the point of them is to run inquiries and to produce reports, principally making recommendations to the government and a wide range of public bodies and holding them to account. And they do that by inviting evidence in, and we use the term evidence quite broadly. I'll come on to that, but they invite evidence in from the outside, look at it all together and derive from that the recommendations that they want to make. Now, in the House of Commons, we have committees that are specifically looking at spending, policy and administration of government departments. So every government department that you've got, Ministry of Justice, Home Office, DWP in my case, has a select committee shadowing it, as it were, scrutinising it, following it up. So there's a very direct link and mapping. We also have cross-cutting committees. So I used to work for the Petitions Committee, and it's obviously what it looks at is all of the petitions that are started on the e-petitions website and paper petitions presented by MPs. But we've also got a cross-cutting Science and Technology Committee, Women and Equalities Committee, which go more broadly than just looking at a single department. The members of those committees are backbench members of Parliament, and they are a mix of parties depending on the balance of the numbers of seats in the House at the last election. And there are usually 11 of them. So they work on a cross-party basis, and that to us is really important, because select committees are a space away from the main chamber. They tend to sit around in a horseshoe, and the idea is that there is cross-party collaboration rather than partisan opposition. And so once those recommendations go to the government, they have the power of having been agreed by a group of MPs or members of the House of Lords, as it may be, from different political viewpoints, all saying the same thing. And that's the real power and influence that they have. They are completely independent of the government, which is I'm sure well understood in this group of people, but you will appreciate not necessarily widely understood in the outside world. They are staffed by a team of people who work for Parliament. So we are not civil servants, but we are a bit like the parliamentary equivalent of civil servants in that we are politically impartial. So we work for the House, we work for the whole committee. We don't have any party political affiliation, and our team leaders glory in the impenetrable job title clerk, which is I think we tend to say quite often in the Commons call ourselves team leaders, because that's what we are. We're also the principal procedural advisor to the committee on the rules of the House and on practice more broadly. And if anyone's interested in the jobs that we do and the roles that we have, I'll very happily answer questions about those. And the other important thing to say about House of Commons select committees is that their chairs, in almost every case, are elected by the whole House of Commons in a secret ballot. So that was a change brought in 2010. I think it's just about time now for me to stop saying it's a new thing that we do, because it has been nearly 11 years. Before that, it was essentially a process of with a degree of fixing up by the whips, and everyone, the committee would be set up and everyone knew who was going to be the chair, and it was elected by the committee itself, but everyone kind of knew what was meant to happen. That change in electing chairs was intended to, I suppose, do two things. One, make sure that those chairs had a mandate from across the House, and also give them a degree of independence from their own front benchers. Because it's in a secret ballot, no one knows who's voting, and that's been quite a big change for us over the last 11 years. In the House of Lords, I must admit, the House of Lords is not an area of great expertise for me. I think the important thing to know about it is that the committees work in broadly the same way, but they have a set of kind of complementary remits. So they don't shadow specific departments like our committees do, but they have a mix of permanent and cross-cutting committees. There's quite a new committee with the astonishingly broad remit of looking at public services, which I think is a really interesting new development that they're doing. For a long time, they've had an economic affairs committee and other cross-cutting remits like that. They, like us, have a science and technology committee as well. And they have as well what they call special inquiry committees. So those are committees that are set up to look at a particular issue and then report back on it. And then once they've done their report and their work on that issue, they stop existing and the House sets up some new ones. They, like us, run inquiries and publish reports on issues within the areas that they're scrutinising. Again, like us, their members are backbench peers, so independent of the government and of the front benches of their parties. And they have, again, like us, politically impartial teams of staff. Their staffs are quite considerably smaller than ours. So I think a typical Lords committee would have about 3 staff. We have usually about 7 or 8 in the Commons. So the volumes are quite different. Just something to, I guess, bear in mind if you're dealing with one or the other. How does it all work? People, I think probably one of the questions that people ask me most often is, how do committees choose what they're going to look into? And there is no straightforward answer to that question. It's a range of things. They have freedom really broadly to choose their subjects of inquiry. So they might be driven by what the government's doing. So if the government announces a big policy change or a new project, that might be an impetus to say, actually, well, we need to have a look at this and try to steer and influence where it's going. It might be something that goes really quite wrong, something where lots of people are writing into the committee, perhaps the media are covering it, perhaps people are writing into their own MPs to say that this is going really wrong for me, and that all kind of comes into the committee and they say, actually, look, this is something we've really got to have a look at. It might be to some extent, you know, especially in the Commons, there are things that we do because they sort of have to be done. Scrutiny of public bodies, for example, we do that even if there's no great sort of particular thing to look at, but just to make sure that they're kind of continuously being held to account. Things come all over the shop. They might be suggested by stakeholders, they might be suggested by charities working in the sector might write in, or business groups or anything like that. So huge range of different sources. Some committees, I'll come on to this later, but some committees have done very deliberate opening up to the public and asking for suggestions of inquiries as well. So they can come from anywhere. Once the committee's decided what it wants to do, it will publish a call for evidence. So that will set out usually the questions that the committee is interested in, or the topics that the committee is interested in. They'll usually, not always, but usually, you'll hear me say that a lot, it's often true in Parliament that things usually work in one way, but sometimes work in a different way, usually ask for evidence in writing. They can commission research. In the before times, we used to sometimes go on visits and meet people where they were. So my committee, for example, would quite often go to job centres to go and talk to the staff there, to talk to people who are accessing the services there. We've been to schools. We'll come on to that. To talk to teachers, to talk to pupils, parents sometimes. So we've done a little bit of that online, maybe less than we would have liked, but going out and about finding things out. We might at this stage as well do public engagement, which you're going to hear a lot more from my colleague Shapla later on today about. And they will take, usually once we've read the written evidence, seen where people are coming from, take oral evidence in public. So that's a formal parliamentary proceeding. It's usually in Westminster, but it doesn't have to be. and the MPs sit around their horseshoe table, or the members of the House of Lords, and will ask questions of witnesses. Now, when I say witnesses, I know that gives it that flavour of a courtroom, but actually, for the most part, we're hearing from experts and asking them questions as a kind of fact-finding exercise. So, we might have academics, charities, businesses, people with lived experience of the policy issue that we're looking at, and then kind of gradually, I suppose, the tone moves from fact-finding ultimately to accountability, because usually towards the end of that process, the committee would hear evidence from perhaps the public bodies that are responsible for that policy area, and usually at the end from ministers, and that's where the tone starts to shift, and we're thinking more about accountability than fact-finding. Well, there's always a bit of a mix. The committee then kind of takes some time to look at all of the evidence that it's heard in the round, thinks about what it wants to recommend to the government. We go away on the basis of what they want to recommend, suggest a draft, which the chair then takes to the committee. The committee then debate it and agree it. Most of the time they do that on a collaborative and a cross-party basis. So that's quite different from what you see sometimes in the main chamber of both houses. There is usually an impetus to try and get something that everyone is happy with. Not always, sometimes there are votes and disagreements, but big push for consensual reports. And then in the end we publish it. After that, the government has committed to replying to reports within 2 months of them being published, which certainly the DWP usually do that pretty promptly. I think performance varies depending on departments and sometimes on the report, and the government gives its view on the recommendations. And in some ways it ends there, but in a sort of process way. But committees, certainly in kind of recent years, have understood that to be really effective, they need to follow up on recommendations and keep pushing. So often after the government response, things will keep happening. I think one of the really important things to bear in mind about select committees is, certainly as far as our evidence is concerned, we operate with maximum possible transparency. So our calls for evidence are completely open. Anyone can send evidence in. Almost everything we receive is published. Almost every oral evidence session that we have is in public. You can watch the video live, you can catch up on it later. We publish a transcript. If we go somewhere on a visit, we will say that usually in the report. We might publish a summary of what we heard. It's all in public. And I think that is, by and large, I'm sure everyone would agree, a very good thing. I think particularly in your context, where you might be thinking especially about facilitating young people taking part in parliamentary proceedings, it's an important thing for you to be aware of. And committees on the whole are really reasonable about, for example, publishing evidence anonymously, redacting identifying details where that's appropriate to do. But it is just, and we're quite alert to that from a safeguarding perspective at our end. But it is just kind of worth being aware that things sent to us, unless it's really, unless we have a really clear discussion about confidentiality and anonymity, there's always that kind of risk of things going into the public domain and then being on the parliamentary record. So in terms of select committees and thinking about how people can get involved in them, the first thing to do, I guess, is to find out what we're up to. I guess for you, the obvious committee to follow and be interested in would be our colleagues on the Education Committee, but I would say they are far from the only committee that is doing work that's relevant to young people's experience or that wants to hear from young people. I think our colleagues on the Women and Equalities, for example, did a really big and important piece of work on sexual harassment and sexual violence in schools a few years ago. We on our committee did a visit to a school longer ago than I can remember, 2019, as part of some wider work on the welfare safety net and social security policy. So don't just think it's the Education Committee is not the only group of MPs interested in hearing from young people far from it. Find out what we're doing. People can send written evidence to an inquiry, so that is something that can come from an individual, or could be a collaborative exercise of people working together and writing and making recommendations. And there's lots of inquiries that are for which it's really important to have evidence of people's lived experience of policies on the ground. But equally, committees are also interested just in hearing people's views on the topics that they're raising. I mentioned visits, so we've been to schools. I've also taken MPs back in the day down to our education centre to talk to young people about online abuse and safety online. So there's lots of things going on there, and we are really open to suggestions for inquiries. So sometimes that's quite formalised with a kind of formal call for what would you like us to be looking at, what would you like us to be doing. But it can also be informal. If you're seeing things, I'm sure MPs, members of the House of Lords, would want to hear that. I mean, we can't obviously promise always to pick up on those suggestions, but it's really important for us to hear what is happening out in the world to inform the scrutiny that the committee's doing of the government. And the one thing I haven't mentioned here is public engagement. That is only because I know Shapla will talk to you in much greater detail about that later and with more expertise, but that's more informal sessions of getting together MPs and groups of people to talk about a particular subject. So that's my whistle stop tour, which leaves us with 10 minutes for any questions that you might have for me about select committees, how they work, how to get involved, what I do, anything along those lines. I'll stop sharing so I can see you all.
Oh, thank you very much, Anne-Marie. That was really interesting to listen to again. So thank you for taking the time to come and talk to us about that. I can see that we've already got a question in the chat box for you. John asks, how do teachers get their voices heard? None of the teachers I work with have ever been asked to make contributions to the future role of education in society.
What an interesting question. Well, look, I mean, I think there's probably a bigger question even than for Parliament. I suppose there's a big question, to be honest, for the government there. But I am sure that what I would suggest is looking at the work that the Education Committee is doing, because which will be there on their website, their Twitter feed will help. I am sure that they, on a regular basis, are wanting to hear the views of teachers, and I would be very surprised if there aren't opportunities to get involved there. My committee's taken evidence from head teachers quite recently, so they're quite focused on hearing from teachers. I know that now Rosie might be able to speak a little bit more to this, but we have a teacher ambassador program, and that's sometimes how we find people that, when we think, oh no, I need a teacher. We want to hear the views from teachers. That's one of our routes in. So I guess engagement with our colleagues in the education service for parliamentary engagement as well.
Oh yeah, thanks, Anne-Marie. Just on that point, yeah, we do run a UK Parliament Teacher Ambassador programme where we see teachers come to us under more usual circumstances every year for some training. And then, yes, as Anne-Marie said, we very much kind of stay in contact and you act as an ambassador for Parliament. But we also have a kind of new programme that we'll be launching called the Teacher Network, but we'll talk to you about that more later in the session, and we'll be able to send you some information about that. But yeah, just once again, ways for us to hear the views of teachers like all of you on the call. Thank you very much. So we've got another question from Chantel, who asks, what is an example of a topic that special inquiry select committees have tackled?
That's a really good question, and my mind has drawn a complete blank. I'll mull that in the back of my mind, because I'm not from the House of Lords. They don't stick in my mind. There's so many. There's one at the moment on There's one at the moment on COVID, as you would probably expect. But they do a whole range of things, and now none of them are springing to mind. But I'm sure they will come to me. In terms of pushy, that's a super question. I remember when I first started in this job, and I met my new boss, and he said to me, I didn't really know much about Parliament before I started, and he said to me, the main power that committees have, really the main power that committees have. And I was thinking, oh, brilliant, what's this going to be like? Can we, fine them or imprison, what is this power? It's the main power that committees have is embarrassment. And I kind of thought, wow, really? Embarrassment? Is that it? And he was right. I mean, we do have formal powers. You'll have seen committees kind of summon non-government. The Murdochs, for example, is the one that sticks in the mind. But in terms of committees' powers to influence, it's not those formal powers usually that are the main ones. It is the power of chipping away. So we've got no power to compel the government to act on what committees recommend. But what select committees do have is a pretty unique kind of standing to pressure government. So if I think of just something we've done recently, we published a report on universal credit just before Christmas. Well, no, it was in October. There's a House of Lords committee that came to some quite similar conclusions and recommendations. The government's responses were very disappointing to the committees, and so the two committees agreed they had a joint meeting and essentially hauled in the minister to give evidence and to press him on why the response was so disappointing. Has that moved us on yet? I would say not yet, but I think there's a sense of making a little bit more progress every time. So in terms of kind of things that committees can do, MPs and peers can table questions. They can those can be written questions, oral questions, urgent questions. We can have further hearings. We can write letters and publish them and put the pressure on in lots of different ways. What they can't do is have that element of compulsion. But we try, and again, it's increasing all the time. I think the energy that committees give to follow up. Super interesting question from Paul about committee chair being a genuine career path. I think I would say yes. That has been a change. I think if you look at the people who are select committee chairs now, they are more often people in the early part of their parliamentary career. Certainly when I started, it tended to be people often who had been ministers and were no longer ministers and were in a sort of second phase of their career. Now people are coming into that much at an earlier stage. Try not to be ageist, it's not necessarily an age thing, at an early stage of their career. I think also if you look at the I guess the profile of people now who are select committee chairs, it is just broadly much higher, I would say, and they pack more of a punch. So I think definitely there's a bit of evidence that people are starting to really see that as a way through. I'm going to canter through the questions because we've got 5 minutes. Jane, Instagram, interesting question. I think we have through I think the House of Commons Instagram or possibly the Parliament Instagram at times on different committees that I've worked on, we've had a kind of, if you like, a guest slot on those bigger accounts. I think we would probably struggle from a kind of resource and indeed level of interest point of view to maintain kind of enough constant posting to have our own account. But yeah, so we kind of piggyback on the bigger followings from time to time of our colleagues who run those central accounts. We've done I think we did a survey on Instagram a few years ago to try and pick, because they are really different audience from Twitter, and I'm always quite conscious that we post, I don't know if this is quite where your question was coming from, but we do post a lot on Twitter, but that is a particular audience. I'm starting to feel quite old, and often an older audience, quite a politically engaged audience. So we are conscious of that. But it's tough trying to juggle the resources that we have. Or take up. I think there's a big question about effectiveness of select committees, which is a sort of probably a kind of classic undergraduate essay question for politics students, which is how effective are select committees. And I think there have been academic studies of which I think the broad conclusion is more effective than everyone thought they were, which is heartening. I think if you look at the kind of proportion of committee makes recommendation, gets the government response 2 months later, how many of those recommendations does the government say, oh yes, brilliant idea, we're going to do that right away? Quite a low proportion. If you take a longer view, and I think this is what the academic studies showed, if you took a kind of 2-3 year view out from those recommendations, actually rather more of those things had got done. And I think that reflects the fact that actually that 2-month response window is not necessarily long enough to have influence on the kind of scale of what committees are recommending. But actually in the longer term, you see more of those recommendations being picked up, not always exactly in the same form, but the government starting to shift its position over time. And so I think, I must admit, off the top of my head with the Education Committee, I do not know, but I suspect they're in the same place as the rest of us, which is, yeah, that immediate hit, not always great. That might have changed a bit in the last year when they've played quite a big role. I think your second question about ongoing impact is more important, because as well as that question of recommendation to acceptance, there's also the wider influence. So some of the things that committees do include just pushing issues up the agenda, so making things matter to ministers when they didn't before, because once the select committee gets on it, then the minister knows they've got to come in front of the committee and answer questions. It's actually on their radar. They know they're going to come under pressure. That makes things happen, and sometimes putting whole new topics on the agenda that government isn't talking about at all. And I think that impact is hard to measure, but it is there, and it's important. And it's almost, I think it's just as important, and perhaps in the long term more so, than that kind of what I think of as the kind of tab A into slot B recommendation acceptance relationship. Shapla, thank you. There we go. Shapla's team are bicameral, so she can remember things about the House of Lords. I should know about the Intergenerational Fairness Committee. My chair gave evidence to it. There we go. Oh yeah, regeneration of seaside towns. It's really all over the shop. Super interesting question from Gary on number of submissions. It varies widely. On our committee, normally I would say a normal amount, 150 to 200. I was talking to colleagues the other day from the Women and Qualities Committee who had an inquiry with more than 1,000, and someone else had more than 2,000. I'd say on average, I guess 150 is probably around normal. Different sectors are different, so I guess in kind of foreign affairs and defence, I think they get fewer, whereas those of us on social policy get more. But yeah, it's quite. It's certainly increased in the 12 years I've been in the House. Rosie, have I got 1 minute to answer Zoe's question? What's unique about being a clerk?
Yeah, that sounds great as a perfect final question.
I suppose the unique thing, there maybe two things. One is I guess being a parliamentary specialist. So we have colleagues on our team, as you would expect, who are policy specialists. We are policy generalists, although I do, after a couple of years, know a few things now about pensions and social security, but I'm far from being expert. I guess one of the things is that breadth that my chair might phone me up shortly after this meeting and ask me a question about anything in the committee's remit, and I have to have a good stab at a sensible answer. So there's that breadth of kind of breadth, but to some extent sort of superficiality of policy coverage. But also it's really the parliamentary specialism. So while obviously lots of our colleagues in the team know a lot about Parliament and how it works, it's having that depth of parliamentary knowledge to be able to advise even in extremely unusual circumstances, like, for example, summoning a witness, where but there's both a complex and rarely used process and a kind of degree of politics. So I suppose it's mixing those two things together, and being the source of that authoritative advice about Parliament. There we go. Only 2 minutes over.
Anne-Marie. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us today. It was really, really interesting to get your insights and how select committees operate. And I think importantly for colleagues on the call, those opportunities for pupils to get involved and for teachers to get involved as well. I think important to know that there's the work that UK Parliament do, but ACT, of course, give evidence regularly. And we've seen lots of teachers involved with ACT giving evidence on topics around teaching citizenship. So thank you very much. It was great to hear from you. And I'll hand over to Liz and Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Anne-Marie. That was amazing. And thank you, Rosie. We're moving now into our first teacher-led workshop session. And
Zoom. Look at that.
I'm just going to find Sera and make sure she's on screen. There she is. If anybody's not on mute at the moment, because I can hear a little bit of background noise, perhaps you can just check that you're still muted. So it's my pleasure to introduce Sera. She is a citizenship teacher in Leicester, and she's taught at a number of different schools. She also teaches GCSE citizenship studies, and she's very kindly come today to lead our first workshop. She's been doing quite a lot of thinking about the role of select committees in parliamentary democracy and how we teach that through citizenship, but also through other subjects. And she's going to share with you today some of her early thinking about how it fits into the curriculum. So over to you, Sera. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz, and hello everyone. It's great to be here. I've been teaching all day, so I'll try not to be rusty and to appear a bit more fresh for you. I'm just going to share my screen. Those of you that have got smartphones, if you have, would be great to take part in something which I'm trying to share. Okay, just bear with me 1 minute. I'm trying to show you that. Okay. I'm hoping that's going to work. No. Okay, right. Can you see the screen?
Not yet, Sera. Just try the bottom share screen button again, maybe.
Yeah, I'm trying that. Sorry, I've been practicing all day and then it just doesn't work when you...
It's always like this. As soon as you... There we go. It's coming up now.
Brilliant. Okay, sorry everybody about that. Right, if you have... lovely to be here. Thank you very much. I'm wearing my ACT badge, Liz. I've been wearing it all day and students have been asking about it. So that's great stuff. So if you do have a smartphone, there'll be some QR codes coming up. I'm sorry about that, but we can put some links in the Padlet as well. I'm just trying to get it onto full screen and it's not going. Okay. Can we see that? Or you can see all of the people. Is that okay there?
We can definitely see enough of it, Sera. So if you can't get it to full screen, don't worry.
Okay, I'm not quite sure what's going on. I think I have to do something about presenting online. So the first thing I'd like you to do, if you can, is to, it's not going to do anything, is to pop into the QR code if you can. Oh, there's loads coming up already before I've even asked you to do it. Think of any phrases, 3 phrases or 3 words that you hear that capture the word select committee for you. It's really anonymous, so just feel free to be as honest as you like about this. Just give you a couple of minutes and then, in fact, less than that, and then we can feed back what we have. Okay, let's have a look. Accountability, Parliament, scrutiny, they're coming thick and fast. I'll share this as well, not just right now. Investigate, fantastic, right. quite a few focused words in terms of functional words about the role of a select committee. Just can't see the word amazing resource for the classroom yet, but I'm sure that's going to be coming up in a minute. And I hope that's what you're going to get from this presentation. Keep those words coming if you haven't quite got those words up yet. So what we're going to do in this short session is I hope to give you a flavour really of how I'm starting to think about translating learning around select committees through the curriculum to create a really rich learning environment for young people. So in particular, we're going to be thinking about the why. Why should we teach about select committees and the relevance to the citizenship curriculum, thinking about the where and how select committees and the what next. There's a second workshop that Stephen's going to run later on today, and he's going to continue the theme of what next can we do about select committees and give you some practical ideas there as well. So that's the plan for the session. Okay, so why are we even talking about select committees and their importance today? Well, we know that political education is an important part of a broad and balanced education, and one that prepares young people for adult life. But knowledge of what select committees do and how people can use them to influence decision-making and hold the government to account applies across all of the nation's curriculum in the UK. Today, I'm going to be talking from my context as a citizenship teacher in an English school. I'm focusing on the House of Commons Select Committees, but I'm also aware that the role of functions of government and politics is very much a huge feature in the Welsh, Scotland's and Northern Ireland governments as well. So hopefully some of this thinking can easily be applied to those countries as well, countries' curriculum as well. And throughout the curriculums of the UK, the teaching of politics through citizenship around issues of democracy, government and parliament is central. Here you can see the statutory requirements for Key Stage 3, and that's aged 11 to 14. And that's the citizenship curriculum for England. And here again, you can see the progression of political knowledge needed both within Key Stage 4, which is aged 14 to 16, and GCSE citizenship. So at GCSE, students need to understand several ideas which might differ across the exam boards, but broadly know how Parliament holds government to account through oversight and scrutiny, and how select committees work in both of the houses, how they scrutinise and how citizens can contribute to parliamentary democracy, influence policy and laws through recommendations, and hold those in power to account. So just to recap then, from what we've already heard today from the great speakers before, if you look at how select committees work, it's really a great democratic model for how we might want our classrooms to work. We want young people to have access to their democracy. So just as select committees seek to establish knowledge and influence policy in order to make positive changes that make a difference to people's lives, so we want young people to learn about issues that affect them and how they can influence and contribute to the improvement of their community and beyond. And in doing so, they're naturally creating real change. I think that's a great goal, isn't it? All young people, politically literate, critically aware and really passionate. And the purple bits there just at the bottom, not many people realise that anyone can submit evidence, and many inquiries use social media platforms. We've heard that today already, and this makes them even more accessible for young people and indeed teachers. But the question is really, how do we make use of this in the curriculum? I would like to share how I've been starting to build my citizenship curriculum. So using a conceptual framework really to avoid issues being taught in isolation. And when that happens, say the topic of select committees, learning could become quite dry to teach and to learn. A citizenship advisory group put together this framework, and it's really useful For example, if you're teaching about select committees within a unit of work, rather than them being just included as an example of a function of scrutiny within Parliament, how can they be explored through democratic concepts? How do ideas of rights, equality, representation, authority, power and justice manifest themselves through committees? And how do select committees influence our democracy and give legitimacy to government? How do they uphold rights and justice for people and society? So framing them in concepts really make them more meaty for young people, and it would be difficult to consider all of them in one unit of work. So spacing them out makes them much more coherent. So I've got people coming in and out of the classroom at the moment. I hope you can't hear that. It's not all about knowledge though, otherwise life would be really dull, wouldn't it? It's about skills building and providing meaningful opportunities to practice those skills. So from thinking about where things sit conceptually, the next stage really for me is I'd start to think about the questions needed and the sort of the knowledge and the gaps in student knowledge and what they might be and how knowledge can be interleaved to make sure students get a bigger picture. So here's some questions, by no means all these questions and all of the questions that could be asked. Again, this is very much context dependent. When you look at questions though on this screen and imagine being a student, they might not really set your world on fire. I'd really want more if I was learning about select committees. We learn because we're interested in something, don't we? So, you know, the question, how can I get involved, may be the key to ensure students believe something awesome is about to happen. And of course, teaching about select committees, I think it will be quite awesome, something to happen, and we'll see later a bit. So helping you to build lessons around those answers, you can find so many great resources. ACT and Oak National have excellent citizenship resources ready-made and available for you. And also these incredible resources provided by the Parliament Education and Engagement team. And the website there is on that. I need to move that across. Is on that screen, and I can't. I'm really sorry I failed with showing you the full PowerPoint here. So on the website, you're going to find some great resources, booklets for all ages, which provide a well thought out sequence of learning. And each booklet has knowledge you need to create engaging lessons and activities to enhance skills and suggestions to build rich learning experiences for young people. They really are great. I've used them a lot, so do have a look at those. Okay, on to my next. Here's another example. I started to think about creating schemes of work, and so this is what I've come up with so far. And one of the questions really that always gets asked in citizenship forums is, how do we teach the whole programme of study in a limited time we have? Well, the answer is you really can't. So if you teach in a thematic way and use interleaving strategies, it might help students leave with at least a connected and coherent knowledge of how important democracy is and how they can access and participate in it. This model shows how a small unit of work can bring in concepts, knowledge, and more importantly, the how can I get involved element we spoke about. Through models like this, students can progress from learning about rights, how select committees can impact on the lives of vulnerable groups, how young people can campaign for equality, to more critical analysis of the role of committees in democracy, their strengths and limitations. And the more exposure to case studies and live inquiries will give them lots of help to make sense of alternative perspectives and reasons for holding different opinions. And I've seen really, as students begin to use these concepts confidently to explore connections and think deeply about issues, then they become more aware of debates in relation to each concept, and they start naturally to become more critical and creative in identifying possible action. So let's have a look and move that forward and take the framework idea and use a topical issue. I saw in the chat and heard the reply about some of the inquiries that are on at the moment. So I've got quite a few for you. Hopefully you'll find interesting to use. So topical issue concerning prisoner education at the minute being scrutinised by the Education Committee, and Stephen's going to talk to you a little bit more about that later. This one inquiry can be used across different year groups just by changing the focus. So what I did was examine the witness statements and pull out ideas to frame the learning and essential questions that need to be tackled. And this in itself can be a student-led activity. So if we take the rights and inequalities column there, you'd find, if you went on the website, witness statements from the Howard League claiming that youth offenders have no choices in the courses available to them. No arts is taught, no music, and mostly the curriculum is all about maths and English for young people. 42% of adult prisoners report having been permanently excluded from school, and a large proportion of prisoners do not have any formal qualifications in English and maths as well. Well, from those three bits of information gleaned from a witness statement, of course you need to do your fact checking, but there's a whole host of right-based issues here which could lead to an active campaign on the rights of education. And you can see that other material has been pulled out to frame the other concepts as well, which I was quite surprised about. That last one, look, fairness and justice. Prisoners get the same rewards or pay if they mop their floors or attend a course. So naturally begs the question, well, what motivation is there for students actually to learn? So really interesting themes and topics that can be gleaned and explored with young people. And after the arguments and issues have been researched, it could lead to solution finding activity or debates about whether, for example, put some there, look, whether every teacher should have to work one day in prisons a week. Not sure I'd like that, but I think young people would have a lot to say about that. I'd be quite interested to debate that as well. So I'm moving on, rattling through. Sorry about that, but the PowerPoints are going to be available for you, and happy to take questions at the end as well. So we all know that having an engaging and purposeful curriculum will involve students more, and there's some evidence base to show this. MARGE is an acronym for 5 principles of efficient learning: motivate, attend, relate, generate, and evaluate, that Arthur Shimamura put forward. That's okay, it's quite an interesting read, and the QR code links to a free chapter of his work. Anyway, most of us, I think, I'm sure, do this in our teaching, and it's pretty obvious. If you want someone to learn, the first principle is to motivate them. And well, this is really easy when teaching about select committees. There's so many ways you can teach by using the inquiries yourself. For example, there are incredible witness statements of Grenfell Tower survivors available online that can be shared with students to bring learning to life. Recently, we've seen the move to commit to a ban on conversion therapy. Videos and testimonies are all available and accessible. And sadly, across our cities, there's so many issues concerning housing and affordability, safety and access, and communities and committees do address these issues, and they're issues really central to young people's lives, and they can get involved in lots of different ways. So just to give me a little break from talking, I wonder if you could put into chat any of these select committee inquiries that you recognise from the images, any issues that you recall from these. It's a nice little activity to start stirring student curiosity about the issue and the story behind the image. Now I can't see any of the chat, so I'm just wondering, Zoe?
So, what we can see in the chat for you, Sarah, is we've got Windrush, Leveson, Stephen Lawrence, phone hacking, another one saying Windrush, Grenfell, question mark, Baroness Lawrence. Another person votes for Windrush. So
okay, yeah, fantastic. I think you've nearly got them all there. You've got the Home Office Select Committee questioning Amber Rudd about the Home Office targets. You've got the Culture, Media and Sports Committee hearing evidence about the phone hacking scandal. You've got the Home Office hearing evidence from Baroness Lawrence again. This was actually not when the first one was Windrush. Baroness Lawrence is talking about the Macpherson report, and you've got the housing communities. That was a tough one for support for survivors of the Grenfell fire. And also the blue box there, that mentions dealing with controversial issues. It's a good thing to be nervous about tackling difficult or sensitive material with young people, but it shouldn't stop you from doing so. And there's so much advice and great practice and resources on how to do this from ACT, especially an excellent deliberative classroom resource, and I'll link to that later. So here are ways, some of the ways that I use images to build curiosity through issues, and it's quite a powerful learning. So making connections, what connections can you draw between these issues that affect your community? Maybe how did this issue start? How should it end? Are we in the beginning of this issue at the story? Or are we in the beginning, the middle, the end? Linking the concepts to themes, really good for retrieval practice. How does it link to past learning? What themes will it come up in future learning? And then scrutinizing the narrative. Are there any ideas or assumptions being made that you disagree with? Quite high level things, thinking for young people. They could even be thinking about the makeup of the committee members and where bias may or may not come in. And then lastly, you could be thinking about also the changes that we affect, how convincing are witnesses in terms of influencing change, and how could we use this as the basis of action. So just to recap, when thinking about building knowledge through select committee cases, really think about positioning the issue, scrutinizing the facts. That QR code links to a really lovely video on Live Learn on select committees from Parliament Education, and lots of different videos online there. And then it's about the debates and action. And that's really how I think about planning my sessions with young people. And they seem to really enjoy that. So if you're not sure about setting up debates, I've got a bit QR crazy there, really many apologies for that, but we'll put up all the links for those. Those links to places that I use a lot to get some resources from Debating Matters, Politics Polls, YouGov, Hansard Society, Democratic Audit, and the Institute for Government are really excellent sites. And again, think about the issue. You've got some there that I've mentioned, and the debate can be around the information actually contained within the committee, or it can be generally around the role and function of select committees more generally. So select committees have no impact, they're reactive rather than proactive in all those ideas. Okay, so let's move on to see how learning, progress and assessment outcomes can be supported by learning about the scrutiny function of select committees and the mechanism for exercising it. So teaching students about the scrutiny function of select committees I think has got a lot of value. You're helping students to deal with information from witness evidence from diverse stakeholders, which students can watch or read to look for patterns. And these patterns could be arguments or facts. They're thinking about viewpoints in relation to their own and adding new information to support their thinking. And they're learning new vocabulary, new perspectives along the way as they analyse ideas and rank them for reliability, suggesting strengths and limitations. And working in this way means you're harnessing oracy and the skills needed to examine written evidence in order to build informed discussion and debate with young people. And the link there you can see is to that resource that I mentioned before, written by Lee Jerome, which will help you to develop deliberative techniques to help you lead knowledge-based discussions and debates with a lot more confidence with students on topical issues. So really excellent resource, which I've used a lot of. So let's look at how the process of select committees might help learning. Here's a really simplified diagram, couldn't fit more information on, so apologies for that. But the process of select committees can be drawn directly upon and parallels made with planning active campaigns. And an active campaign within citizenship does make up 15% of their GCSE exam. And if you use a similar format to plan action projects, they can provide an excellent opportunity, not just for retrieval practice of specific questions around scrutiny and the working of Parliament, but also students can use the committee model to help them explore what it needs to be successful. And it's a great working analogy for students when considering how to work in action groups. They can see that committees work in cross-party groups and they must collaborate for consensus, that recommendations must be evidence-based rather than ideological and so forth. And there's lots of recent exam questions that have been based on campaigns. For example, collaboration is essential in undertaking effective citizenship action. Ensure you've considered another point of view. So it's really not difficult to see how learning about, experiencing and taking part in mirroring the work of select committees will greatly enrich a young person's understanding. And here in the pink, this is one way perhaps of how I do it to show how select committees work. And you can see there that I point out that's how they would work. So we need to all be working with negotiating ideas and consensus building. And that's okay, we all have different views. What they need to just do is pull together as a team there. And the action project then moves on through similar stages. It will identify and all the issues related to the citizenship theme that you want them to explore, they've chosen to explore, and think about how to investigate it by being more focused. Then students will plan their secondary and primary research and carry out the research and plan the action. So I think for active citizenship, as even the process of a select committee is a really great model and has value there. I realise I'm totally running out of time. A couple more slides to go, that's it. So I ran a political speaking competition for Leicester for many years. And one of the problems that students had was, especially when the news, nothing was going on in the news, it was so hard for them to find current issues to talk about. So had I known this way back then when I'd started 15 years ago, that would have been absolutely incredible. Look at these current inquiries and think, well, could they inspire young people into action? The work that's been done through scrutiny has really great learning potential, not just for young people, but also for us and our own subject knowledge as well. So they're current ongoing inquiries that people can get involved in. And if you don't have much curriculum time to add select committees to your teaching, there's lots of opportunities for them to engage students. There's not just the to engage with the Parliament Education team, and there's also the British Youth Council, and there's the Youth Select Committee, who has lots of interesting inquiries that you can young people be inspired by. Also the politics projects you'll hear about later is brilliant, both for digital surgeries or getting students to present evidence to select committees. Some of my students are going to be doing that very soon, so they're really thrilled about that. You could use theme weeks such as Parliament Week to start conversation, or theme days. Stephen Lawrence Day is coming up in April. And you could also look at remodelling student councils and how other departments can deliver political issues. So through art, for example, there's an inquiry on the Black history and cultural diversity in the curriculum. That's actually what my students are getting involved in. And so it gives an opportunity through art to think about Black history more and how all voices are heard as well. And there's other ideas there. No idea what the science one is about, but kids are creative, so I'm sure they will come up with some ideas for that one. And then finally, just to say, we know that young people have a real thirst for knowledge and they're really very already political. And our job is to harness that and give them the opportunities to exercise the rights they have to participate in democracy, and helping them to become both critical and political citizens, to become those active scrutineers. And in Stephen's workshop later on, you'll see practical examples of how to encourage young people to become real agents of change. And I've got through a lot of information, so if nothing else, please, for what I've seen, select committees are a real opportunity for young people to get their voice heard on real issues, and it helps them to get involved in real social justice issues and actually see change and impact. You can relate it to citizenship concepts. I really believe that it provides for progression and challenge and oracy skills and analytical skills, and just provides activities for opportunities for active citizenship. So really the only thing left to say is I hope you can generate a buzz around select committees at your school, and thank you very, very much for listening, and I apologise for rattling through that quite quickly.
Brilliant, well done, Sarah. I wonder if you can unshare your screen. That's excellent. It's nice to see your face again. Your slides were brilliant, and a number of colleagues have commented on that. We've just got one quick question which we'll take in the chat, which was, have you ever or do you ever show learners footage from Parliament TV of select committee proceedings, and how do you use those in your lessons?
Yeah, so we did. We had a quick look today at the online. There's the one for banning the conversion therapy. I would watch it beforehand, and it takes a lot of work, but it's worth it, because a lot of the select committees can be rather dull for young people. But at some points, there are certain bits of information that are very useful. So there's no easy way around it. You'll need to watch the committees online and just select what you need for young people. But, you know, they're really just very interested in what people have to say. Yeah, so just go for it.
Excellent, brilliant. And I know colleagues want to know where they can get your slides from, and we are sharing Sarah's slides as well as all the other presentations from today through the conference Padlet. If you can't remember where that is, don't worry, because you'll get another email, or Zoe might be able to post that link into the chat for you as well. So we're gradually putting the presentations on there today, and we'll add the recordings from today as well. Brilliant stuff, Sarah. Thank you so much. You put so much work into that, and it really shows, and people really appreciate it. We're going to take a short screen break now. So Sarah, you can relax, as can everybody else. Grab a quick cup of tea, and we'll restart at 4:15.
Okay, welcome back everyone. I hope you enjoyed that short break. Welcome to those of you that might have just joined us. Thank you very much for coming along. Just a reminder, as Liz has said, that all of the resources used today will be included in the Padlet, the link to which will be shared with you by email following the session. And I know that Zoe's popped that link in the chat box as well as the recording for today's session. So you'll have a chance to go through all of those and recap on anything you may have missed, or look at things in closer detail. But now I'd like to introduce our next speaker. We've got Shapla Begum with us on the call. So Shapla is the Senior Engagement Officer in the Select Committee Engagement Team at UK Parliament. And as we've learned today, it's crucial that select committees engage with a range of people in their inquiries so they can hear valuable and real life stories. The Select Committee Engagement Team connect groups and individuals with select committees so they can contribute to their work. So thanks for being here today with us, Shapla, and over to you.
Hi, thank you, Rosie. I'm just going to share my screen quickly, but welcome everyone. I hope you've enjoyed the session so far. Just bear with me a second. Can you all see that?
Hi, Shapla. Yep, we can see that fine.
Brilliant. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I am Shapla Begum, and I work for the Select Committee Engagement Team. I've been sort of working there from 2017 onwards. I know you'll have heard a bit about how select committees work earlier on in the session. And in this part, I'm going to really focus on how we as the engagement team engage with the public with the work of select committees. And what I'll do is I'll use some examples as well, so you can see the types of things that we do. So to begin with, just some context about our team and what we do. So we support select committees by engaging with the public through holding informal consultation events. We gather their views and experiences, of audiences that committees want to hear from, but can't reach through their formal channels. So there was actually a library briefing paper done which outlines the different groups of people that are politically disengaged. And that outlines 5 groups, including like women, 18 to 24-year-olds, people from ethnic minority backgrounds, those that are long-term unemployed or have unskilled workers. And those are the types of groups that we largely try to target through our work. We are quite a unique team in that we're bicameral. And also we work in participation. So although we're supporting select committees, we work in a public-facing team that has lots of teams within it that sort of deliver to schools and community groups. Okay, so why do we do public engagement? Well, as part of the House of Commons strategy, public engagement plays a key part plays a key role. Engagement is key across the strategy and not just for committees. And so there are a number of reasons why we do it. One being it's our duty of Parliament to listen to and represent the public. Also for collaboration between Parliament and the public, to gain insight into issues from those directly affected by it, and to reach people who have not engaged with Parliament before, and for the reputation of being a fair and effective legislature. So to illustrate what we're up against and why public engagement is so crucial, I'm going to talk to you about the Hansard Society, who put together the audit of political engagement. So in 2019, the audit of political engagement showed that the public's opinion of the system of governing was at its lowest point in the 15-year life of the audit study. So that's worse than the 2010 MP's expenses scandal. Less than 35% of people were confident that MPs, parties and the government act in the public interest. So that's just to give you sort of illustrate what we're facing and why our work is so important. So I've mentioned a lot this engagement word, and I thought it would be good to give you some pictures of what our engagement event looks like. And you'll see that there's a difference between the images on the left and the right. The right side, we have images of what our face-to-face event used to look like. So all of our events are now digital. And with that, there's lots of pros, but sometimes it can be quite restrictive as well. So you'll see that the images on the right-hand side show people in this kind of deliberative format where they're able to have that to and from dialogue, really sharing and exchanging their views and delving deep into issues. And we've now mimicked that online, so via Microsoft Teams. So visually, it doesn't quite look like that, but people are in one space, and you could call it face-to-face. And through Microsoft Teams, we're able to even achieve breakout rooms where we can put people into smaller groups so they can discuss lots of different topics under a broad theme. Okay, so I mentioned the deliberative method to you, which is the sort of most commonly used method, but we've also got lots of other methods that we use. So for Go to Democracy, to explain that best, this is where we have a committee inquiry, for example, that has a glaringly obvious audience, and that we know where that audience is going to be, and so we go there to speak to people. So to give you an example, the Environmental Audit Committees into toxic chemicals, as part of that, they wanted to find out what knowledge consumers had on everyday furnishings and toxic chemicals being present in everyday furnishings. So we visited IKEA and we spoke to people there that were shopping to find out, and we then gathered their views and brought it back to the committee. And filmed interviews. So where we have audiences that are particularly difficult to get hold of, perhaps they are in remote areas or they're time poor, we can actually go and interview them and film them and then bring that back for the committee. My colleague actually went to Northern Ireland to film some fishers about their kind of concerns and the impact of Brexit and the fishing industry in general. We then brought those videos back and shared it with the committee, and that played like a really valuable part of their inquiry work. So we have education and community polling, and this is, so what we do is we set up a survey with either school-age students or our community groups, and we can do that in two ways. So we have our education centre in Parliament, which sees lots of students on a daily basis, and what we do is, if we know there's an inquiry where they're one of the sort of key target audiences that they want to hear from is school-age students, then we would set up a survey, and the students that visit the education centre then get an opportunity to feed into that live survey, so into that live inquiry. So what we would do is we gather their views over time. They would answer or submit their answers using an electronic device. So in that way, we're collecting over time, and then we're able to share that with the committee. And in the same way, we have our education outreach officers who are able to deliver the polling when they deliver workshops in their community groups. And finally, distributed dialogue. So of all of them, I think distributed dialogue takes a longer time to set up, purely because we're trying to get it sent out as widely as possible. And we were sending it to lots of different groups, because the aim is to get to reach people widely and to get that breadth of data. And so the way that these work is that we create a discussion pack, and within that discussion pack, it has like some guidance on how people can run their own events. So we would contact lots of different networks, and we would pass on these packs to them. They would have a look at the guidance, and then they would, within their own networks, they would hold events. They would share that feedback with us. So we actually did this with the Science and Technology Committee on Social Media and Mental Health. And I think that we created a distributed dialogue pack that went out to 40 different schools. Teachers had lesson plans with it, they had lots of different resources, and they had information on how to gather students' views. They then submitted that back to us. And I think in total, there was about 4,000 people involved in that. And earlier, you spoke to, the chair of the COVID-19 committee spoke to you, I'm sure, lots about this particular inquiry or example that I'm about to speak to you. And I thought I would share it just to show you the kind of link of how we work with them and the different things that we can do. So with this one, there wasn't just one engagement method we used, there was quite a few. I guess because the committee's priority was to hear from as many people as possible in a variety of different ways. So we had our online events, and that captured the in-detail views of people. They were able to go in depth and sort of share their lived experience of the pandemic and how it's affecting them. But we also had our discussion packs, which were sent out widely to schools and community groups. And then finally, something quite different is that we encourage people to submit evidence in a way which is, could be considered unconventional. It wasn't in the standard written submission form. We asked people to send us videos, photos, and audio. And this example I'll use now demonstrates how outputs from engagement events can be used and the impact it can have. So the Home Affairs Committee wanted to hear the views of young migrants on the issue of migration and how it affects them. We connected with an organisation called We Belong, who gave us access to the migrants that they work with. We then invited them to come along and have an online session with us and share their views on that topic. Aside from that, they also submitted videos online, so on Twitter, where they talked about the most important issue, and they talked about what they'd like the minister to address. So what happened with that is those videos were collated, a summary was created, and the committee actually had an evidence session later that week with the minister, and they were able to share the experiences directly with the minister. They then invited the minister to come and speak directly to the migrants. Oops, gone too further. Right, inclusion. As you know, the aim of our team is to engage with audiences that committees have historically had trouble reaching. So referring back to those sort of politically disengaged groups, that they're the sort of groups that we want to hear from. And so it's really important that we are inclusive, and in a number of ways, not just the sort of obvious ways. And so there's lots of different things that we do in order to be inclusive. The most obvious ones being having fully accessible venues, and making sure that we find out if people need additional support to be able to attend our events, and then making adjustments based on that. But also things like thinking about what time of the day that we hold our events. So is it a particular time where people with childcare responsibilities aren't able to attend? Other things like whether people are able to come online. Have they used Microsoft Teams before? Do we need to give them a call and a test call, if you like, and run through how to do that? Do people need to have their travel expenses covered? And we also think about where we're going to hold the event if it's a face-to-face event. So, we try to avoid academic venues. We try to avoid Parliament as well, because sometimes that can be intimidating for people and quite uncomfortable. It's a daunting prospect for somebody that's never been there to come and feel, they can feel intimidated, if you like. And now on impact. So is the engagement worth it, and does it actually make a difference? So as part of our events, it's a standard process to send people an evaluation form so that we can get their feedback and improve our events. And from 2019 onwards, we've got some stats here that I can share with you all. 74% of participants felt that they had influenced the committee inquiry. 90% rated the quality of the event as excellent or good. 88% had never engaged with the UK Parliament before. And there's some direct quotes taken from some people that have attended, and members as well. So a wonderful opportunity to talk frankly and be listened to by MPs. The chair managed the meeting very well and ensured everyone had the opportunity to be heard. And then underneath that, we've got, it was an amazing experience. I believe that the input students provided can be really valuable. So it's just showing you here really that it's kind of beneficial for both parties, members to really gain from the engagement, and in particular reaching groups that they wouldn't have heard from otherwise. And that's it. So now I'd like to open it up to you all, so that you can ask me any questions that you have. I'm sure you have lots, because I wouldn't have been able to cover everything there. Oh, bear with me a second.
Thank you so much, Shapla. That was really interesting to listen to. It's great to get your kind of insights into how we can really get people to connect with this part of Parliament. Just while we're waiting for some questions to come through in the chat box, I've got a question of my own. So I can see from the stats that you've just shown us that lots of the people that will be coming along to the sessions that you run will have never engaged with UK Parliament before. And kind of beyond the work that you do around inclusivity, is there anything you do to kind of make people feel comfortable when they come into that situation? Perhaps if any colleagues on the call had pupils coming along, what could they expect coming into that situation?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. We do play it by ear depending on the audience. But yeah, there are lots of different things that we can do. So the first, obviously now online, what we do is we make sure that we do test calls with people. We give them our contact details ahead of the event should they have any questions and they need to get in touch with us. But for face-to-face events, we send them information about the events. So that would be who's going to be attending, which members. We send them information about the committee, inquiries that they've done before, what the format of the event will be, and also things like, if they have any like worries and concerns about what the event looks like, because oftentimes we call it things like, oh, it's a round table or it's a deliberative format, and to people they might not understand what that is necessarily. So we give them a video, we share a video of what an event might look like, and that video has experiences of people that have been to that events before, so they share their experiences just to make them feel comfortable with that process. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks, Shapla. So we've got some questions come through in the chat box, so I'll move to those. First of all, John, thanks for your question. John asks, what's been your most memorable experience to date in your current role?
Oh, that's a really good question, actually. So the job that I do is incredibly rewarding, purely because I am out there, especially when I was doing face-to-face events, out there hearing from people directly and seeing them feed into committee inquiries. And that's, you know, an incredible feeling where I might be designing an event, thinking about, you know, how am I going to make this event in a way which will make everybody feel comfortable to share their views? How am I going to get people to attend that normally wouldn't attend, feel less worried about attending? And then when I'm there in that moment and they're sharing their views, it's so empowering. Honestly, it's one of the most amazing feelings. And one of those being the petitions inquiry into online abuse. So this was a petition started by Katie Price with regards to online abuse of disabled people. As part of that, I had to run events across Wales, Scotland, England, various different places, and we went and visited groups of disabled people, and we held discussions about the recommendations from a report. So that was actually, there was already a set of draft recommendations, and what we wanted these people to look at these recommendations because it affects them, you know. So we wanted to hear, do these fit? Are they good enough? What changes would you like to see in these recommendations before they're sent off and finalised? And to hear from these people, you know, we had a group of adults with learning disabilities. So we had to be really careful because some of the topics were very sensitive. You know, these people have lived experience of online abuse. So a lot of planning went into that, into making sure that we had the right support systems there. But to hear from them and hear their lived experience and then see that published in the report, a whole section, that I would say to date, that is the most, the most important.
I can imagine. Thank you again. We've got another question from Chantel, who asks, can we approach select committees to get involved in events, for instance, if we have pupils in hard to reach groups?
Yeah, I suppose so. This is where we would actually come in. So the way that committee inquiries work, and we don't sort of have that system where it can be like that. Although one way for people to really keep in touch with committees and see what inquiries are happening is to visit their inquiry page and to follow them on Twitter, because there you will see what inquiries are going on. And if there is, they have something called a terms of reference, where it talks about the topic and the background of the inquiry and what kind of things they want to hear from people on. So you can get involved through that way. You can send send in your evidence in that way. But one way is to sign up to the mailing list and put your interests on there. So that's how a lot of the times when we are looking for audiences, we have a database where we would go and look up people that have signed up, who have shown an interest in attending our events. And when people join the mailing list, they have the option to select which topics they're interested in. So for example, if you're interested in education or health, you would select that. And if there's an inquiry coming up based on that, where we're looking for an audience, that's how we would find you. And that's how we would, based on that, we would send you an invitation through your emails. Yeah.
Excellent. And might be helpful as well if we take the link for that and pop that on the Padlet that we'll be sharing afterwards, so you'll be able to find the link directly to that. Thank you again. So we've got a question from Jennifer, who says, many of my students have a barrier of their own accessibility. They can't see themselves doing a job like yours or being part of the parliamentary process in general, and feel that it's not for them or about them. Can you give a brief overview of your path into engagement with Parliament and subsequently select committees?
Yeah. Can you repeat the last part of the question again, Rosie? Sorry, I don't think I caught the last part.
Yeah, of course. No worries. So if we could just get a brief overview of your own path into engagement with Parliament and subsequently the select committee side.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I my background is in education. I was actually an English teacher. So I had no idea I was going to end up here. It wasn't in the sort of long-term plan at all. I wanted to change careers because I went into teaching at quite a young age, but I knew I was very passionate about participation. I knew I was very passionate about diversity and inclusion. And in all honesty, I didn't even know what a select committee was. I mean, most people don't, and it's not, it's nothing to be ashamed of. Most of the times when we do our events, we have to explain what select committees are. Sometimes you have to explain the difference between Parliament and government. I mean, I think when you're in the world of Parliament, it's easy to assume people know these things, but actually it's more common not to know. And so for me, when I came into it, I barely had any knowledge, but I knew that I was passionate about those things. And for my particular job role, there wasn't a particular like prescribed qualification that I needed to do this job. I think I just hit the credentials for it, and I had the passion for it. And when I came in, I was really keen to make sure that we were reaching a diverse range of people, and start building partnerships with lots of BAME groups and things like that. And so I guess for students that feel wary of it, my advice to them would be to now, I guess now is the time to explore those horizons. I know that Parliament do a careers fair, where you can come in and explore the different departments and the jobs that are going and things like that. So just to have exposure as much as possible before coming in.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And there is a job section of the UK Parliament website which does kind of highlight the really big range of roles and people with different backgrounds that we have working with us, as well as apprenticeship schemes as well. So that might be something that's quite helpful to look into for pupils. Okay, so next question from Mohammed. Thanks, Mohammed, who says, in my opinion, working with students it may be very important to develop their cognitive ways. Okay, thank you. So that just a contribution there from Mohammed. On to Tom, who asks, hi there, Shapla. Have you found the pandemic has made it more difficult or easier to engage with the general public with select committees?
Good question. So I have found actually that there's a lot more. So now that we're online, one really great thing is that we can have sort of location is no barrier. We can have people from lots and lots of different regions in one space now, whereas before we would have to try and go to different locations in order to hear from people in those regions. So now we have, that's no longer a barrier, and it's almost, we're getting a lot more people turn up at our events and a lot more interest in them, and I think that's because of the convenience of the fact that we're online. Yeah, so I would say a lot more interest, but there is the only downside to it is that, as I said, as part of inclusion, we want to be able to keep our events open and inclusive to everyone, but we have to look at the fact that there are lots of people that are digitally excluded. They might not have access to a computer or a laptop, might not even have access to data. So it's working around that as well and making sure that we're not just doing it in one way. If we know there's an audience out there who want to feed into the inquiry, but we're only holding online events, then it's going to exclude them. So we try to do different things like send printout forms where they can send their feedback, provide prepaid envelopes so they can send that back to us with ease.
Brilliant, thank you so much, Shapla. I think it did. It was a very full answer. Thank you. So I think that's the end of the questions that I can see in the chat box, unless anything comes through. So just seeing some lovely comments come through. Thank you, Jennifer, for your response as well. So in which case, I'd just like to say a huge thank you again for joining us, Shapla. It was really interesting to hear what you had to say around the work that you do and the wider work of the Select Committee Engagement Team. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Rosie, and thank you for having me.
No problem. In which case, I'm going to hand over to Liz.
Thank you, Rosie. I'm just going to remove pins and find the next people that we need to have on screen. So we're going to move into our second teacher-led workshop. And I can see Stephen on screen, which is good news. So I'm going to put a pin into, sounds terrible, doesn't it? Put a pin into somebody, but that's kind of a Zoom thing. So I'd like to introduce Stephen. Stephen is a teacher at Altrincham Girls Grammar School in Manchester. He's also an ACT ambassador. So he's one of our experienced teachers who will work with colleagues in the Manchester area. And of course, through our events and CPD conferences, as he is doing today. Stephen's actually been involved with some of his students in select committees. So he's got some direct experiences that he may be sharing with us. And he's also been doing a lot of thinking about how to use select committees in different ways in his teaching and in his classes. So I'm going to, without further ado, hand over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Liz. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Stephen. I'm kind of going to pick up on some themes and kind of follow closely from kind of Sera's presentation on how to use select committees kind of in the classroom. And I am totally okay with saying, you know, kind of I knew a little bit about them, and then I've come to this conference today, and I've been doing lots of reading, and they are just such a great source of kind of political knowledge if we know about them, which I guess is the whole purpose of today. So I've got lots of presentations to share, and then I'm going to also towards the end get Hattie to come involved, who is the founder of the Politics Project, and she's going to talk about how kind of that works as well. So if you just give me a minute, I will share my screen. Can people see that?
Yep, you're all good, Stephen. Thank you.
Yeah, so kind of like I said, I'm going to start with two things. We're going to look at how to model a select committee in the classroom, and we're going to look at two ways we can get young people to directly engage with a select committee by giving evidence, and that's where Hattie kind of from Politics Project is going to kind of come in as well. So picking up from kind of Sera's presentation, she kind of outlined this idea of how we can kind of split select committees into 7 stages. And I'm just going to play a really short clip. It's only a minute, and kind of as you're watching, just see if you can identify any of the 7 stages you think might be involved with in a select committee, and then put them in the chat either as you're watching or at the end. I hope this works, because I don't think I've ever had a video play successfully on Zoom. So we will see.
Government departments have an impact on every aspect of our lives, but they do not have free rein to do as they please. They have to justify their policies to Parliament, and in particular, the select committees. Each committee has the job of scrutinising the work of a particular department of government. A select committee is made up of around 11 or so members of Parliament drawn from all political parties. These politicians combine their efforts to pick apart and examine every area of work carried out by the department they are scrutinising. They do this by deciding what inquiries they should hold and calling for written evidence from the public. The committee then takes evidence from all sorts of different experts from across public life. They then use the information they have gathered to question ministers and secretaries of state. You can watch all this activity and read every word spoken online. You may not know this, but anyone can submit evidence to a select committee inquiry, not just academics or think tanks. Committees use lots of methods to gather evidence from as wide an audience as possible, and committees often take themselves around the country or even around the world to see the evidence for themselves. Once enough evidence has been gathered, a committee will publish a detailed report full of recommendations for the government to act on. The government then have 2 months to respond to Parliament. But this is just the start of the story. The Select Committee report often initiates further action and campaigning by pressure groups, charities and the media. This can often be the first step in a countrywide political debate affecting the future of the country.
Yeah, so I now actually can't see the chat, so I'm hoping kind of someone will see if there's anything in there. Did anyone identify any stages involved in the select committee?
Not much coming into the chat, okay, Stephen, but I'm sure that people have, and I'm sure that you're going to help people identify some of those stages as you go through.
I will carry on. Yeah, so broadly, it can be broken down into about 7 stages. Now, kind of 7 isn't an exact science, but I think kind of we can break them down into 7 things. If you do teach citizenship, you may be familiar with this type of things kind of when you do active citizenship. So breaking down a kind of campaign, either for GCSE or kind of the Association for Citizenship kind of teaching, do a kind of wheel of active citizenship, which kind of breaks that down into 7 ideas as well. So we've got the selection of the issue. We've got the election of the chair and MPs. We've got the call for evidence. We've got the questioning of ministers. We've got the report stage. We've got the government response, and then we've got further action. Now, as kind of Liz says, kind of when we kind of first met and started talking about kind of planning this, we all decided that it would be a really good idea to try and have a model of a select committee and kind of how they work in the classroom. And I somehow got tasked with trying to have a go at kind of putting some thinking down about that. Now, kind of we use models all the time in the classroom. So you may have used the young citizens kind of model of a courtroom. If you ever taught the law, you may be familiar with things like kind of model United Nations and their model of how the United Nations works. You may have done some model parliamentary debates. So kind of modeling in the classroom is kind of something that a lot of teachers already do. But alongside this, you've also got the idea that you can pick out skills from each kind of aspect of the select committee, which can be used to develop kind of students' ideas. And I have had a go at kind of creating a pack of a model, which I will share with you at the end, and someone will put on the Padlet. But this is really just a first kind of draft. It's the first stage, and hopefully it can be developed through some more kind of discussion, kind of hopefully kind of with the people on this call and from wider field. So kind of stage 1, well, we probably kind of want to select an issue, a policy, or an event to explore. And if you've kind of never used the select committee website, I would strongly recommend that you have a look. It is very easy to navigate. You can use a keyword and find a whole array of select committees on a massive range of issues. And as kind of Sera kind of referred to in her presentation, we kind of focus on prisoner education. So this kind of presentation and the associated kind of pack references the prison education inquiry, but you can substitute this fairly easily. So once you've got your issue, what would be a great idea to do is to try to break down the inquiry into what exactly the select committee are looking for. So if we look at this one above, I'm not too sure how well you can read it, but you know, these are the issues involved in it. So we've got things to do with prisoner education, we've got the role of prisons, we've got the role and purpose of punishment, and we've got the role of education. Now this for citizenship links really well with those options where we do the law, but I'm sure if you teach politics, there will be a select committee out there what covers either issues relating to the global paper or the kind of USA theme you can do in the A-level politics kind of specification. Kind of number 2 is the chair and the MP selection. I should probably say at this stage, I've kind of altered the stages kind of for the classroom, kind of so they work better. Kind of typically, you know, there'd already be the MPs and chairs, but it doesn't really make sense to do it that way kind of in the classroom. So I have switched them around. And when you talk about how the chair and MPs are selected and elected for the select committee, you can then talk about how kind of other issues as well are kind of coming up. So the kind of idea of crossbench work and what that means, and kind of how do different MPs from different political parties come together to work together? Is it good? Kind of what issues might happen? And the whole process of modelling elections, which we're quite used to doing, kind of when we do parallel elections, general elections, local council elections, but we can model this in terms of selecting a select committee as well. And then really the call for evidence, I think, is probably the most suitable stage kind of the classroom. I think there's a lot in this stage that you could unpick and use either within the whole model or kind of through the development of skills. And when a select committee calls for evidence, they publish a kind of web page or a document which asks kind of some key questions. And this is what you could use kind of in the classroom to unpick and create some activities from. So you could look and see kind of how we can involve everybody. And I think that is the key idea of a select committee. And I know it's been kind of the focus of a lot of discussions today of kind of how select committees involve and allow people outside of the world of politics to get involved in politics. So things like ordinary citizens, kind of witnesses to events, kind of young people, experts, so kind of academics, kind of civil society, kind of NGOs, and kind of victims of certain things, if that's what the select committee is looking at. I also kind of, with the focus on young people, I was really fortunate to work with the Politics Project to allow some year 13 students to give some evidence to a select committee about young people and driving. And they had a great time. They really valued the experience. They thought that, their impact and their views were being listened to. Here's just a tiny transcript of kind of one of the questions. So they were looking at kind of, should young people be allowed to drive at night? And obviously, if you ask this question to a group of young people, we weren't the only ones on the call. You were obviously going to get a lot of kind of answers from the young people themselves, which will then influence, kind of future policy. And they had a lot to say on this topic, as you might kind of imagine. And kind of the Politics Project and the Select Committee kind of offices were really helpful. They provided lots of kind of information. They kind of answered any questions you had. And then after the Select Committee, they kind of email you with a follow-up and they tell you kind of what's been happening and kind of where the stage is at. So it is a really good opportunity, which I'm sure Hattie will be happy to speak about at the end of my bit. Kind of oracy is a key skill in the classroom that we want to try and kind of let our students develop. And I think kind of if you're using the evidence kind of selection part of a select committee, it is a great kind of way to kind of encourage oracy, because a select committee will collect evidence via oral contributions. And there are lots of ways kind of you can kind of do this in the classroom. So I was thinking the other day kind of how, my GCSE citizenship class, for example, are looking at rights at the moment, and we're looking at, we've just done today actually, like the Human Rights Act. And, if I was more organised, we could have, looked at kind of select committees and kind of looked at the evidence given, and they could have taken on the role of kind of different groups who would be involved in the select committee, and from that group's perspective, offer evidence to the Human Rights Review Committee on the kind of changes the government want to make to human rights. So there are lots of opportunities to get young people to improve their oracy, and I've just put some links on here to things I have used in the past. So kind of Voice 21 kind of is an oracy charity. The Noisy Classroom talks about debating. Teach Like a Writer is from an English teacher, Jennifer Webb. She's very active on Twitter. She has a great website, and her book, Teach Like a Writer, is a really valuable resource, and she also has some free resources on her website. And then the Deliberative Classroom as well, developed by ACT and Lee Jerome, who is an academic, really helps develop oracy within a citizenship classroom. So there's also the stage, obviously, where we question ministers. So here is Gavin Williamson being questioned in the Education Select Committee fairly recently over schools and kind of things like that. Kind of not every stage, you might not be able to get something on every stage, probably just kind of some of the stages. So when everyone is given evidence, people write a report, and a report writing kind of activity will be really good to develop students' written communication in the form of opinion pieces or an article, or they could model writing a bit of a kind of select committee report on an issue they have been studying. So just some very early thinking, kind of my year 9s in citizenship. They look at how the government is organised, and last year we looked at international development. I'm the department for kind of international development when they existed. I'm kind of now they don't. But kind of as I've grown in my knowledge of select committees, I was thinking, well, actually, maybe we could explore some evidence given in a select committee, and they could use this evidence in their writing to help support their points and ideas, because there is such a rich source of evidence in the kind of contributions given. Yes, it is, I suppose, teacher kind of intensive. The teachers probably do have to find the evidence, especially for year 9. Maybe if you're teaching A-level politics, they could find their own. But like there are things that you can do with this evidence within the classroom. So here's just some evidence kindly given to a committee about Pakistan and aid, which could be used, as a point for kind of students to develop in some writing. We then have the government response, and we look at kind of what the government does. And this is a really useful thing, perhaps, to look at the direction of government policy, to think about, differences between different political parties, and a method of accountability. Are the government following through on what they've said they are going to do? And then the final stage is the kind of future and further campaigning and the active citizenship, if you are a citizenship teacher. There are lots of ways people can hold the government to account, and select committees is just one of them. Within GCSE citizenship, it's a fairly common question to ask, which one, offers the most accountability, which one is best. I'm sure there are kind of similar ideas within politics as well. So I got my class to have a go at what I call an accountability pie. I'm sure it's a well-known technique, but they basically look at the different groups they've studied, and they give, a section of the pie to the group they think gives the most accountability for people, and they have to justify their reasoning. So this would be a really good essay planning tool, perhaps, before you got students to launch into an essay. My year 11s had a go the other day. They currently have their mind elsewhere, shall we say, with the GCSE announcement and things, but they gave it a go, just just to model it, and they said it was quite a good idea. So that's always good. And kind of Sera mentioned at the youth parliament and select committees, kind of youth kind of parliament does also have select committees. Again, you can bring these into the classroom so young people can watch and see how young people can make a change to community and to social life. I'm not going to play this because I'm running out of time, and I really want to invite Hattie to kind of speak to you all as well. But that's going to start playing, so I'm going to pause that. And here is an actual video of the Youth Select Committee kind of on YouTube, again, just to show young people. But before I invite Hattie to come in and join us, I just want to kind of give you a quick change of this. So this is a document I've kind of put together in a very early stage of kind of thinking about how we can break this down into the classroom. I've tried to give you some learning activities for each stage and to have a think about, how can we kind of use this in the classroom. I've tried to make it as kind of user-friendly as possible. And this will be on the Padlet after the kind of talk. It's about 10 pages long with each stage broken down. So I hope it is use to somebody. That's all I have to say. I will obviously try and answer any questions you have at the end, but I'm going to invite Hattie, founder of the Politics Project, who I hope is out there somewhere, to share the work they do, and I'm going to stop sharing.
Brilliant, thanks, Stephen. I'm just going to locate Hattie so that I can give her a pin so that she'll appear in our recording later. There she is.
Hi, Liz.
Welcome, Hattie.
Hi, everyone. This has been a really fantastic conference, and it's great to kind of hear about select committees from lots of different angles. I found it really interesting, especially because of the work we do on select committees as well. So I'm just going to quickly talk to you about an opportunity that we've got to schools. So we partner with the select committee engagement team, who you were talking to earlier, to support schools to give evidence in actual select committees. So I know a couple of you were asking in the chat, kind of, how do we get our students involved in that? I'm just going to talk to you about an opportunity that will help you to do that. So I'm just quickly going to share my screen so I can show you a quick slide. There we go. There you go. Can you see a slide? Is that right? Yeah, great, fantastic. Just checking. Great. So as some of you might know, the Politics Project, we really specialise in this idea of what we call political contact. So all of the times when you bring together young people and politicians. So most of our work we do through a project called Digital Surgeries, which I know that some people on the call already take part in. But we also run a project called Digital Dialogue Select Committees, which is a kind of offshoot of that work. And that's all about supporting young people to give evidence to certain select committees. And we use a similar model for that, but we've done a lot of thinking about how do you make sure that when a group of young people are giving evidence in a select committee, we're making sure that they can succeed. We're setting them up to be able to, really have something to say and be able to kind of add a lot of value to those select committees. So in terms of the way it works, we just work with the select committee engagement team. So sometimes they will just say to us, we have a particular engagement that we would like to talk to some students about, some young people about, and we will go out and we will talk to various schools and various teachers and ask them to engage with us. So we're working with Sera, who you heard from earlier, in a select committee engagement session just after Easter. So that one's on diversity in schools and will be really, really interesting with the petitions committee. And then we worked with Stephen with the transport committee on a piece of evidence talking to young and novice drivers in September. So in terms of the way the opportunity works for schools, if you are interested at all, then please just register your interest using that link that we've got below. I'll put it in the chat as well, and I'll make sure that it's added to the Padlet. So if you're interested, that's the best way to get in touch. And then what we have is we kind of have a bank of schools that are interested, and then the committee will reach out to us. They sometimes have certain kind of demographic needs that they need to fulfill. So we will pull together a group of schools that meet that brief, and then we will support those schools. So we support with teaching resources. So there's an example of one of our teaching resources in the Padlet, so you can have a look at that. But we also do some work on kind of designing the way the session works itself. So for example, for primary age students and for younger students, we will sometimes change the way that those sessions work so they're a bit more gamified, so they're a bit more kind of interactive, so that again, students don't feel quite so intimidated, they don't feel like they're being grilled in the session itself. All of the evidence sessions that we run take place over video call, and they'll often engage more than one school at a time. So sometimes there might be kind of 3 different schools giving evidence in one session, and that can be a real nice benefit to students to see what other young people think about an issue and to kind of get the views of other young people as they go along. We also support with things like comms, tech, safeguarding, all of the kind of nitty gritty parts of doing any of those sorts of things. So we kind of, we'll kind of pick you up and work with you in any way. It's all completely free. And so just let us know if you're interested using that link below. I just want to mention one other way that we can support learning around select committees, and that's through our kind of core digital surgeries program that we work with about 200 schools with now across the UK. So the digital surgeries is all about connecting classes of young people with politicians that represent them. But we've done several sessions where we've worked with certain schools to work with select committee chairs or members of select committees. And we've done that particularly if schools are exploring particular issues. So we've worked with, there was a select committee on AI a couple of years ago. We worked with the chair of the AI select select committee, and students talk to him about issues around AI. And then we've also worked with the select committee on Brexit. Yeah, the Brexit select committee, to talk about issues around Brexit a couple of years ago. So there's also that opportunity as well, and that can be a really, really fantastic way if you're exploring an issue and there is a select committee taking place. The chairs are always really, really happy to engage and get involved in that. So again, I'll leave details of how to get involved in that programme as well, but you can just visit our website for that one. That's thepoliticsproject.org.uk. But yeah, just we've had an absolutely fantastic time when we engaged with Stephen and that group of students on the Transport Select Committee. And from my perspective, you know, it's one of the most impactful things that we do is the Select Committee engagements. And we get to kind of see it from both sides. We get to see the young people giving evidence, and we get to, you know, we hear from the committee about how they actually really do pick up and use the evidence that the young people give them. And I think one of the most rewarding things, and you guys will probably feel this as teachers as well, is that sometimes the committee can think that they're kind of engaging sometimes as kind of a, oh, you know, we should be engaging with young people, and then the moment they get in the room and they have the conversation with young people, actually they find their contributions incredibly valuable and they actually kind of change the way that they make policy. So yeah, it can be a fantastic thing to do, both as a learning opportunity and as an opportunity for the young people to kind of use their voice. And I'll leave it there. I'll pass you back to Stephen.
Yeah, who I will pass you back to Liz.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Hattie. Thank you for adding to what Stephen has said. And thank you, Stephen. That was a brilliant session. I'm just going to look for Stephen to bring him back on screen. Let's just see whether there are any questions about either Stephen's presentation or Hattie's. One thing that I was thinking about, Stephen, and actually Hattie, maybe you'd like to respond to this too, is with the work you've been thinking about, can you see how it might work with a different learning context? So you were talking about using select committees in your lessons, but I'm wondering if there's an application maybe as a whole school or whole year group activity or an assembly activity or something else, so that there's maybe different ways in for people to use some of the select committee ideas in different kinds of teaching and learning activities. I don't know if you have thought about that, Stephen, but it'd be interesting to know.
I'm not gonna lie, I can't say I have thought about it, but with the amount of groups who are involved with giving evidence to a select committee, like you could see it as a wider learning opportunity, because it would be quite difficult to kind of do it in a class, I think, especially with smaller numbers at kind of GCSE and A level. So kind of some kind of whole school, I don't know how it would work, but some kind of whole school event, I think would kind of make it a lot more richer in terms of the evidence that the people hear. But I like the idea. It would just need some thinking, I think.
Brilliant, thank you. Hattie, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that one.
Yeah, we do. So we just on the same session that Sarah's working on, the diversity in schools session. So one of the ways that the students are giving evidence is that they're making short presentations, and some schools are actually making videos, which are going to get played to the committee, and some schools are taking the opportunity to kind of do that at a kind of cross year group level. So they're delivering the content to the whole of a year group. Everybody is contributing in pulling together those ideas for the video, and then only a few students are going to be able to be in the evidence session, but it means that kind of everyone is able to contribute in that way.
And do you have any tips on how to really enhance pupils' persuasive qualities? We had a comment from John in the chat about the examination fiasco, and a lot of students as well as teachers were quite upset, rightly, and wanted to try and hold government to account over that issue. And I just wondered if you've got any thoughts about how to really help students become those persuasive advocates for change.
Yeah, so in terms of how to kind of lobby and kind of use their voice around getting that out there, I think we really see the power through the work we do in a really well-informed young person going, talking to a politician and really kind of doing their homework, pulling together their arguments and being really persuasive. And we're actually doing some work with a team at UCL at the moment, looking at that kind of superpower that young people can have when they pull together, they have a really good band of evidence and a really good understanding of an issue, and then they use the fact that they're a young person, and so they're kind of in some ways more persuasive to a politician, or they can get an audience with a politician in the way that other people can't. And I think that can be really powerful. So I think, have the conversations with the politicians. That's really, that's what I'd advise.
Brilliant. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, Stephen. You did mention the strength of oracy in this teaching approach. I don't know if you've got any sort of tips or thoughts about that one.
I was actually going to support Hattie's point. So I've had a couple of students email MPs for their social action project. And within like a few days, I think by the fact that they're a young person in the school, in their constituency, I think just makes them kind of reply to quite a good depth level as well. They've had a really good, rich and source. There were some students before we got cancelled last year. We're going to talk about kind of lowering the voting age, and they emailed our local MP who's Graham Brady, who was against it, but gave a really good kind of letter back to the young people about kind of his views and why he thought that. And I think to do with oracy, I think it's just kind of get them talking, especially now, they've just come back to school. I mean, I don't know if anyone else was like my lessons, but you used to try to get them to speak, and, the microphone was broken. And, they just didn't say anything, but kind of now is the time to kind of get them researching about issues and kind of get them talking about kind of the things that matter to them. So I think I'm at to stage one about the issue you pick to look at a select committee with, I think is really important, because I mean it's no good you picking the issue because you're really interested in it. It has to come from kind of them almost.
Brilliant. And we've just had another comment actually from Zoe, not least because we're doing a bit of work with Wales at the moment, and I know Hattie is as well, that in Wales you only need 50 signatures on a petition to get a committee to discuss those issues. So not quite sure how it works in England, whether there's a way of encouraging committees to look at particular issues in quite that way, but it's an interesting one, isn't it, in terms of involving citizens in shaping the inquiries that committees have a look at. I think that kind of brings us to the end of this second workshop session. I'd like to thank you hugely again, Stephen, for your tremendous work and being prepared to share your early thinking. It's always brave, but it's always worth it. And thank you, Hattie. We always appreciate your contributions. So I'm going to unpin you, let you go, and bring back Rosie, who I can see at the top of my screen. Let me just unpin Stephen, and I'll bring myself back in at this point. So Rosie, I think we've reached the point where we can just wrap things up for people. And I know you wanted to share some new things that are going to be happening at Parliament first.
Oh, thanks, Liz. So just to say, first of all, thanks again for everyone joining us today. I think it's been a really successful conference. It's been really nice to be able to hear from our speakers and see all of your contributions coming through in the chat box as well. We'd like to finish by telling you about a programme the UK Parliament's Education Engagement Team will be launching from next week. It's called the UK Parliament Teacher Network. And for those of you that were with us for Baroness Lane Fox's talk, you will have heard me mention it in the questions then. So I think kind of focusing on the point that Shapla made around Parliament having a duty to engage with and listen to the public, and a colleague on the call, John, raised a really important issue of kind of teachers being able to engage with UK Parliament. It kind of encompasses that through this network. So UK Parliament Teacher Network aims to be a point of connection really between teachers and UK Parliament, as well as other teachers across the UK. So it aims to grow confidence in teaching about the UK Parliament has on teaching the impact UK Parliament has on your pupils, and also to give you an opportunity to share your existing knowledge and ideas with colleagues, and we've kind of seen them feeding through in today's session. So very simple to sign up. You sign up online and you'll receive a free digital resource pack, as well as invites to training opportunities to further build on that. So we'll be sending you all the link in an email next week. So do look out for that and check out our website next week as well, because it would be really fantastic to have all of you and your colleagues join as well. But other than that, just a big thank you from us for today, and I'll pass it back to you, Liz.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Rosie. That's really exciting. As probably some of you know, ACT is also a community of teachers, and we're a membership organisation. We work with all sorts of citizenship teachers, whether you see yourself as a specialist or a non-specialist. You might be the PE teacher and you do a little bit on your timetable, or you might be a dedicated citizenship or politics teacher all the time. But you're very welcome into our teaching community. We'd love to have you more involved, and we'd love to see you at future events like this. And I'd just like to finish really by thanking again all of our contributors this afternoon. They have been fantastic sessions. They will be available for you to watch again if you missed something or you want to do a quick recap. So we will be sharing the recordings. We will share all the presentations. We have really loved working with Rosie, with David and with Tom at the Parliament Education and Engagement team, and all of their colleagues that contributed today. So a huge thank you from myself, from Zoe and from Camilla, who are part of the ACT team, as well as our ambassador teachers that contributed today as well. So have a safe weekend. Congratulations if you made it through to 5:20 on a Friday, sterling stuff. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. So thank you.